Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the regular Board of Trustees meeting for Tuesday, January 24th, 2023. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Karspeck.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gray.
Here.
Trustee Hardy.
Yes.
Trustee Sorcelli.
Here.
Trustee Murphy.
Here.
Trustee Ayers.
Here.
Trustee Butler.
Here.
Excellent. We have a full board tonight. Next on our agenda is citizen participation. This is a chance for anyone in the audience tonight to speak to anything that is not on tonight's agenda. We will have an opportunity to speak to everything on tonight's agenda, maybe not the 2022 in review. Have any? Okay, we have no one signed up. Is there anyone that didn't have a chance to sign up? All right. Thank you.
Mayor Karspeck, we do have someone online.
Okay, thanks. If there's a caller online, if you could state your name and address, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Thank you.
This is Linda Wilson, and I live at 1461 Marlette Street in Berthoud.
Okay.
And I have a question about the Xeriscape. I believe sometime late last summer, an landscape architect was going to give some information to the town, and I've not been updated on it or have knowledge of it. Is it somewhere within the system, or has the report not been given?
We actually had a full study session on that, and I believe it's the packet. Yeah, it's online. I couldn't give you the date off the top of my head.
We can track it down. It was, the date was December 6th of 2022, so just about a month ago.
So if you look online under the board docs in the packet for December 6th, you should find that whole presentation in there, or you can just watch the video.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is consent agenda. These are routine items. Would the trustees like anything removed from consent? Otherwise, is there a motion to approve consent agenda?
Yeah, I'll move to combine and approve the items on the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, trustee Hardy has moved to approve the consent. Mayor Pro Tem Grace is seconded. Clerk, may a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Ayers.
Yes.
Trustee Murphy.
Yes.
Trustee Sorcelli.
Yes.
Trustee Butler.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace.
Yes.
Trustee Hardy.
Yes.
Mayor Karspeck.
Yes, thank you. All right, let's move on to the regular agenda tonight, and we'll start off with a very special proclamation tonight. And we have Laurel Downer in the crowd, in the audience. Laurel, if you could come to the front, please. To the podium, that'd be great. Laurel Downer, I know you personally and have gone to help me out with Boy Scouts tremendously. And I'm sure a lot of us have had connections with you. Laurel has been running the American Street Flags program for the last 9 years and founded the program, which represents 20 veterans, and they're all tied to an individual veteran. In addition, she also has ran the Wreath Across America for the last 3 years. And I think not only for veterans, but you're an advocate for all first responders, law enforcement and firefighter, and just a great member of the community. So on behalf of the board, we all just wanted to thank you for all the work you've put into the flags.
Thank you.
And I know this is the last year we'll be doing those, but they've meant a lot, and especially knowing that they're tied to specific individuals makes it extra special.
Thank you.
So I wanted to read the proclamation here, and then I'll sign it and we can hand it over. So it says, recognition of contributions to veterans and community. Whereas Laurel Downer served as president of the American Legion Auxiliary Unit number 67, and whereas Laurel Downer has facilitated the Street Flags program in the town of Berthoud to honor veterans for the past 9 years. And whereas during that time, the program honored approximately 50 veterans by way of placing dog tags with the flags that lined Mountain Avenue. And whereas the program was designed to honor all veterans. Whereas the program was funded by donations and annual fundraising to cover the cost of replacement flags. And whereas Laurel Downer has managed the Wreaths Across America program at the Green Lawn Cemetery for 3 years, and whereas the Wreaths Across America program places wreaths at the headstones of veterans in the Green Lawn Cemetery. And whereas, by managing these programs, Laurel Downer provided an extraordinary contribution to recognize veterans in the Berthoud community. Now therefore, I, William Karspeck, Mayor of the Town of Berthoud, hereby recognize Laurel Downer for extraordinary contributions to veterans in the Berthoud community. Just wanted to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is a presentation by the Sheriff's Department on the Flock neighborhood camera. Camera presentation.
Yep. We need both documents.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, so my name is Zachary Anderson. I'm what's called the Community Impact Deputy for the Sheriff's Office that newly was started late last year, and then now into the full transition. So I started this project with this company back when I wasn't in this position, when I was just assigned as a regular deputy to Contract Town, of trying to look at solutions of what we call quality of life crimes, so like auto theft, vehicle break-ins, burglary, construction theft, to try and catch some of these criminals that were committing crimes in the town limit. So basically what this company is they sell to law enforcement and private entities, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the presentation. They sell license plate readers. So basically it's a camera that sits on a pole. As a car passes it, it will take a photo of the license plate in the vehicle, and then that is has the ability to go into a database that deputies or law enforcement then can search when we get crime cases like in a neighborhood, and then it also has the ability to talk what's called NCIC and CCIC, which is basically the database that law enforcement uses to find people that have warrants, stolen vehicles are entered into those, missing people, Amber Alerts, anything like that. That reader, as soon as one of those passes, like let's say a car passes that's stolen and it's entered into that system, that camera automatically alerts deputies and dispatch that, hey, this car that just passed with this license plate is stolen or has a warrant or whatever it is, and it's going southbound, and gives deputies a photo of it to be able to try and interdict this stuff as it comes through town. So obviously, like I talked about, they sell to law enforcement and private entities. They actually got started by selling to private entities, so your neighborhood HOAs, that's actually the CEO that created it, had a rash of crime in his neighborhood down in Texas, created this company because he was a software engineer, and he's like, there's gotta be a better way of finding these criminals, because law enforcement's like, hey, that's great, your ring caught the side profile of a car, but we're missing the one thing that we need, which is a license plate, which creates leads for us to be able to solve these kinds of crimes. So basically, that's how the company got started. Since 2017, which was about their biggest induction, they've seen a 70% reduction in crime in the cities that they're in. So they have a little over 2,000 law enforcement partners right now. And then they capture altogether nationwide about 1 billion plus vehicles per month as it's going by. So they're in 42 different states and then in about 1,500 different cities as they're going through. So right now we're on a contract with this company, which basically means that they provide the products and the software and the tech behind it to let us demo what this stuff can do. At the end of that demo, if we decide, hey, like we're not interested or the money's just not there to pay for it, they take those cameras away and then they end it where it's at. We'll still have access to the database, we just don't have the physical readers. So right now it's just running on a free trial, which started in Berthoud and is expanded countywide to see what it can do. We're working with like city jurisdictions, so Loveland, Fort Collins, the smaller cities inside the county, to be able to run one big demo because they're interested in these as well. well inside their jurisdictions. So Wichita is one of the big ones that they use closest to us that they got started. So in about a year of them using this, they recovered 56 stolen plates, $1.1 million in stolen property. They made 121 arrests and then 16 firearms. And they average about 120 hot tag alerts every hour. And I'll kind of get into the nitty gritty of what our demo is. And then allow you guys to ask some questions because I think that's the biggest point of this. So Larimer County has 54 cameras in total. Not all those are in right now. A big majority of those are in Berthoud. So about 11 of them are currently in the ground, and we're waiting on about 4 more that are just on some CDOT right-of-ways on 287 and 56, just to go through the permitting process that the state requires to get those up as they go. Currently, they're also at 4 of our neighborhoods. 2 of our neighborhoods, 1 at each entrance, so 4 total cameras that were our higher crime areas over the past couple of years, taking statistics out of that kind of side of it. So far, at least both of those, since those have been in the ground since December, we've seen a reduction in the crime in there where we actually haven't had any cases reported to us. Some of them may have gone unreported, but nothing currently reported to us as far as like construction theft, vehicle theft, anything like that inside those neighborhoods this year. And whether it's due to those cameras, I don't know, I can't tell you that. Obviously, crime fluctuates as it goes through, but I think those sitting at the beginning of the entrances currently have a deterrent as criminals try and look at neighborhoods that they're going into. So obviously, public transparency is really big with the sheriff's office, especially the Berthoud squad. It's also big with this company. So the reads in the database, so every photo that it takes of a car only stays in the flock database, which they manage and they control for 30 days. After those 30 days, those plates get wiped and we no longer have access to those. That was kind of the sweet spot that the company found that, hey, we want to create a company that helps recover property, helps solve crime in these towns, but we also don't want reads staying forever where then they can be used to track like citizens' movements, that kind of thing. So the 30 days is kind of what they found, and then they have control to either shorten that or lengthen it, but they said they have no plans on extending it past 30 days just because they don't see any validated reason from talking with the agencies that work with them. Most of the stuff is reacting off of instant data, or when a crime happens, deputies can log into this and get a lead right away by looking at those license plates or suspect vehicle that citizens turn in security cameras, and now we can actually use this camera system to get the plate of the vehicle as it entered the neighborhood, where in the past we couldn't. It only takes photos of rears of vehicles, so as the vehicle passes, taking a photo of the rear of the car, not the front of the car. So this is very big as far as like facial recognition, that's not what it's used for. And then obviously just public transparency that, hey, we're not interested in driving the car, we're just interested in seeing, is this your stolen car that's driving by? Is this the car that committed this vehicle trespass that the law enforcement needs to try and create a lead as we kind of continue. Deputies receive training right now in the use of this system, in case law that surrounds license plate readers that the United States Supreme Court has held, and then department policy that already covers license plate readers that we've been using for a little bit. Some big success stories, you guys obviously it's kind of hard to see, but Castle Rock was a really big guinea pig for this company. So basically this photo just shows them using those cameras and then safely interdicting a stolen car right here in a gas parking lot where they were able to use those cameras. What you guys can see kind of on the side, and I'll just reiterate it just because I can see it bigger here, is so far in that month, which was October, they have about 34 cameras. They are recovered 13 stolen vehicles, whereas before their average rate was around 3 in a month, and now they're up to 13, which is good to get those vehicles back. Obviously, the huge success of this company too is using those license plate readers to figure out where these stolen cars are going and then interdicting them in a spot that's safe. As you can see here, pinching in a gas station, which is what that maneuver is that you see, is a lot safer than chasing a car down the road because it's stolen at 100 miles an hour and then God forbid that wrecking into some citizen that's driving down the road. Right here's another one with Castle Rock that they recovered 3 suspects with 27 combined warrants, so 27 warrants for their arrests out of 3 of them in the car, which is good to get them off the street, and that was off a license plate reader hit, deputies have the ability on cases that they're working to enter those into the system, and as soon as that car drives by a license plate reader, it will alert whoever's working, and that's what happened here. Is the detective entered this car as a suspect for a burglary and then was able to catch the suspects as it kind of passed. Douglas County, another one right here, used it to interdict again in a gas station parking lot where they had one set up that this gas station actually pays for, to be able to interdict another stolen car that entered the lot. And then again here with Douglas County. This is actually a photo from Castle Rock that was about 3 days after they went on a demo, and they were able to recover out of a car that had a warrant. The baggies that you see there that have the blue pills in it are actually fake oxycodone, which has fentanyl in them. And those were about roughly like 600 pills. The clear baggie is what would be methamphetamine, and then obviously one of those guns was stolen, and then 2 guns that obviously should not be on the street because the suspect had a felony warrant and actually could not possess firearms under the current POW law. So obviously the big thing over here is like, what is LCSO's success so far? These have been in the ground since roughly late November. It started with 1 and then kind of progressed. So in a month, so last month, December of 2022, we averaged, at least just in the town of Berthoud, 4 felony warrant arrests, 8 misdemeanor warrant arrests, and then 3 recovered stolen vehicles valued altogether at around $90,000 in property that we recovered. On average, Berthoud recovered about 10 vehicles in 2021, and then had about 30 thefts when we didn't have these cameras. So obviously the goal of these cameras is to start getting these recoveries, even if they're not our own, as these cars are coming in and maybe they're gonna dump one and then take another for that side of it. And then we'll talk about. Hey Christian, do you mind pulling up the folder? I just don't wanna mess it up here. Yeah. There we go. Yep.
And then do you want it full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
So this document right here just kind of covers some of our wins that we've had so far, what we look at. So the biggest milestone was 30 minutes after training one of the deputies' sides on the 28th. There was attempted vehicle theft on the 28th, and a Flock ALPR photo read, which is the company, led to identifying a suspect vehicle, which then was later used with Loveland's plate readers to ID that suspect in that vehicle and then charge that suspect in that attempted vehicle theft. 30 minutes after training our patrol guys that are assigned into the town, they stopped a car based on a warrant that popped up. We're able to recover a suspect that had 5 warrants for his arrest. One of them he was on the run for 5 years from, and then also seized heroin and drug paraphernalia from the vehicle. The 3 stolen cars that we've recovered was a Ford Escape that was out of Fort Collins, another vehicle theft suspect that was identified in the 1200 block of Elm Street. That one I can't go into specifics on just because that's still under active investigation through it, but not having those cameras definitely wouldn't have led to the lead of, we actually had a surveillance video of it, went back through these cameras, were able to find the exact vehicle because it had a unique looking missing hubcap on the front, and then matched those photos up to get a license plate from it. We had a stolen license plate recovery. And then the biggest win so far is that Amber Alert that came out roughly the end of November, right after Thanksgiving, out of the metro area. We used these LPRs to be able to assist the Loveland Police Department. That Amber Alert vehicle passed their ALPR that's sitting on 34, and then we were able to enter it into the license plate readers down here in Berthoud to help confirm to detectives that this vehicle did not come south of their city, and then we flooded their jurisdiction of where that license plate reader hit, which ended up finding the vehicle and then recovering the 13-year-old girl that was kidnapped for that side of it. A bunch of these cases that you guys are gonna see are warrant arrests. So again, on the December 2nd, we had 3 warrant arrests, and then he was cited as well for driving without a valid license. On the 12th, we also had an assault at the Conoco in Berthoud, where a suspect vehicle was identified, but their surveillance video wasn't good enough to get license plates. But the deputy was able to use the surveillance video and again match when that vehicle came northbound on First Street and then pulled into the lot that, hey, this is my suspect vehicle. And then that suspect was arrested for third-degree assault after he assaulted someone in the parking lot there. On the 20th of December of last year, we recovered a stolen GMC Sierra that led to a vehicle pursuit, and then that ended with a pit maneuver right outside the Loves. That suspect was taken into custody that had one felony warrant, one misdemeanor warrant, was driving without a license, and then was also driving DUI on drugs. On the 4th of January, so just nearly into the new year, a suspect was taken into custody for a misdemeanor warrant. That one was for traffic, cause I was working that day. And then on the 11th of this month, vehicle trespass suspect was identified up in Heron Point in the apartments. And then we were able to enter his vehicle into these license plate readers, cause he was coming back late at night, just looking into cars, trying door handles, didn't make any progress, but residents are like, hey, he keeps coming back, this is what the vehicle looks like. One of them actually wrote down the license plate, we entered it into the system, and then once it passed the vehicle, deputies went into the area, and then he was taken into custody as well, and then interviewed for those attempted vehicle trespasses, which was inconclusive just off his statements, but now at least we have the suspect and identified if anyone comes back for that side of it. So those are obviously the big wins. As this continues, we expect this to become more and more as we go on. Right now, the company is on a 60-day trial. That trial has not officially started because all cameras countywide are not in the ground yet. So basically, the cameras in Berthoud, we're just getting for an extended period of time that isn't in that contract 60 days that they set, which is nice from this company to be able to have those for some extra time and see what they can do for the city. So obviously, that's kind of the gist of it. If you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer for it about what's specific about the company or anything related to the license plate readers.
Thank you very much. That's a great presentation. Let's go left to right with any questions. Just yours?
Yeah, thank you. My major question has to do with data collection, I guess. What oversight because it's a private company, right? What oversight do you guys have or does really anybody have to make sure that any collected data is deleted when they said it's supposed to be deleted? And what oversight is available to make sure that any data that is collected is actually kept private?
Yep, so that data that is collected is only shared with the law enforcement agencies that they have MOUs with, which is basically just an agreement of mutual understanding that we have with them right now, where that is kept between us, and then obviously their techs need to review some of that stuff, but they don't have access to like the criminal side database that we do as law enforcement, because that's restricted by the state. The 30 days would be held by them because that's their retention policy. And then the oversight that is on that is this company is publicly auditable. So every search that a deputy does and enters a license plate into there or wants to go look at it for a certain thing requires a case number, which means that search has to be tied to an active investigation. They can't just go in there and type like suspicious car and start using it for nefarious reasons to track the person that they're not having good relationships with or whatever it is. That's audited by some admins, which is myself, a current investigator, our computer services, and then as well as our command structure has access to that to be able to look at those and audit those and see what deputies are searching for, and if there's a problem, they're gonna go seek that out. So internal affairs investigations has access to it, anyone can see access to that stuff that is searched, but we have to enter a reason. I can't just enter in a plate and click enter, it won't let me do it, the company restricts it, that there needs to be a law enforcement case number that can go back and be tracked, which helps with tracking like, hey, what are we using these for? Is this using for the intended purpose? Or are we going down that route where other companies that we've looked at are like, nope, this data stays in here for years, we never delete it, you guys have access to it, you can just plug and play into it and let it search. And then there's no accountability to it, which is a huge reason of going and doing the demo with this company, is that accountability is good for us, but then it's also good to the public that they know that these are being used for the right reasons to try and fight crime and not used to track like citizens movement and things that come up with license plate readers as a general rule, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
It does, yes, thank you. I guess a follow-up to that would
Sure.
be the case number that's required to access any information.
Yep.
Is that, and this may be a silly question, but is that required of all agencies?
Yep.
Or so the sheriff's office is not the only agency that has access to that, but each agency that does access it must use the same case number?
Yep, correct.
And once again, maybe a silly question, but is there, I guess, any way to override that necessity?
Nope, you can't override it, so it has to have a search reason, and then any agency that has access to this database, so like, let's say Loveland Police Department is on this right now, and so is Fort Collins and a whole bunch of other jurisdictions. If they wanna go look in the database for their cases, they have to enter in a case number as well, which is then tracked by user who entered it. So like if I entered a license plate and entered my case number, it would pop up Zachary Anderson searched this plate on this date at this time, this is the case number. So all that is trackable by the company and then by the law enforcement agencies. And then that is also auditable by the public as well. The company is willing to provide that data out to the citizens. When it gets into like privately owned cameras that don't support law enforcement access, that is heavily redacted down to what they can access, just because it's a little bit different as far as like crime statistics and things like that, where they don't, like, let's say an HOA decides to purchase these for their neighborhood, that would be heavily restricted on what they can access versus like law enforcement. But any other agency that accesses it has to put a case number in for the reason that they're doing it.
Thank you.
Trustee Hardy, any questions?
I think you covered most of it. It was about privacy and access.
Trustee Murphy?
Great presentation. I can understand like the usefulness of the tool. It's very powerful. With regards to the presentation, I was interested in understanding what LCSO's policy was on that.
Yep, so our policy on these mirrors current Supreme Court case law, which is basically that these readers are upheld by the United States Supreme Court, that they're lawful because there's no privacy interest in your license plate as it passes one of the readers when it comes to that side of it. Our policy gets more into the weeds of when deputies shall use this, when they shall not, and it mirrors what we train them, which is kind of what I talked about, which case numbers need to be entered, that kind of thing. And then even as the vehicle passes, like let's say today one passes a camera and it says, hey, this plate with this car is stolen, deputies are still required to verify that. So basically it says that this shall be treated as what's called a crime tip, which is no different than a citizen calling in and saying, hey, my neighbor Johnny murdered this guy 5 years ago. We obviously wouldn't just act on that and go arrest, we have to verify the info. So with these license plate readers, deputies are required to verify via photo that the license plate is what the system's saying it is, and that it either matches that car or that the totality of it is all matching up into it. So sometimes the system gets like a O and a 0 mixed up, deputies are required to be like, nope, that's what it was just an error, and then they don't go interdict that car. Or if it is stolen, they're like, yep, this is that car, this matches that, the plate is 100% correct, cause it will give you a photo of the car and the license plate, and then they're free to interdict off that once they establish that that car is stolen or that a wanted person is driving the car, which basically falls in line with the current laws that we act under stopping people for reasonable suspicion or probable cause, no different than like a traffic violation. We obviously have to have a reason for contact, and verifying that is a part of articulating the reason of why we're going after this specific vehicle, as it kind of goes down.
Is that document something you could share with the board and myself?
You just have to contact our sheriff's office and
Okay.
ask, that's just under the discretion of the sheriff if he wants to release the certain policy. But that's always an option to at least ask and go through that, and we can guide you guys that process.
Okay.
I just don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay. And then looking at cost, say we went forward with 14 cameras that
Yep.
we have right now. What would that look like?
So they're about $2,500, so $2,500 per camera per year. And some perspective, the current ones that Loveland have up right now, they just paid for that one to permanently buy it after a demo. That one was $23,000 for one camera, and then that warranty is set for 3 years. After the 3 years, the company can decide not to replace it. Or, hey, we're out of these parts, which we found with this company that they're using from our own, that they just decide that, hey, we went with better products, you have to buy this new product now. Whereas this company, you're basically leasing this camera from them for that fee every year, where you get 24/7 tech coverage. So if that camera gets hit by a car or goes down or something's wrong with it, we can call a number, the company sends a technician out to fix it. If they come out with something better that reads more lanes or more speeds as the vehicle's traveling past it, they'll also come out and replace that for it. So basically that fee is paying for the camera, the pole itself, and then also the software that deputies use for it, and then it's paying for their maintenance, of the database for their end of it. Whereas a lot of these other companies, the sheriff's office pays that heavy price for the cameras, but then we also have to pay to store the data, or this one, the company stores it for them because they like to actually have that ability to control it and release it when they're questioned by citizens or companies or whatever they need to do to be able to dictate releasing that versus it just being stuck with a law enforcement entity.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to ask about is constitutionality and where that lies right now. I mean, technology is changing very quickly and obviously there's case law out there.
Right.
Just reading into it, a lot of it ties into kind of cell phone tracking as well, I understand, is that correct?
Yep, so license plate readers are held kind of at a different standard by the United States Supreme Court than where your cell phone is. So kind of on a tier thing in layman's terms, your house is obviously top, right? Persons are up there, but even that, and then your cell phone is usually right and under in the eyes of the court, right under a home as far as the expectation of privacy. So there's a lot of restrictions when it comes to cell phones for us on that side of it to protect that entity, whereas license plate readers, just because it's a vehicle passing and there's no technical privacy right as a vehicle passes down a roadway, because a lay person or a citizen can go to the DMV, ask for the plate and pay for registered owner info. It's obviously redacted off there, but they can get vehicle info and plate info or snap a photo of it. Same thing with these license plate readers. They're not put in people's yards or anything like that. They're put on right-of-ways next to public roadways or in neighborhoods that approve them on public streets that people drive for that side of it. So that's kind of where the case law comes in. Obviously, things could change, right? The courts hear different cases every year, and as those come out, we can update it as an agency, and then policy and training dictates what that changes towards. So that could change down the road, but right now, that's kind of how it says that they've upheld these so far and held that they're constitutional when using them for the right reasons, right? Obviously, using them for nefarious reasons to track a score next lever or whatever we're doing obviously is not gonna fly for that side of it, but using it for crime tips and then obviously interdicting stolen cars, wanted suspects, Amber Alerts, that kind of stuff has been so far upheld. Obviously, that could change, but then that will just get worked out as it kind of moves along for that side of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really informative, and I feel like hearing the oversight aspect helps it feel more palatable, I guess, because I think there's gonna be questions that people have, but I appreciate that you guys are just confronting that and addressing those issues. And I think it's gonna be really fascinating to hear the statistics for Berthoud on how we are tracking and capturing criminals. So I think just routine updates on how that's working would be awesome for us as a board and for the citizens, just to see that it's working and see how the sheriff's office likes the program and make sure it's working great. My only question is, I'm just curious why Berthoud's the starting point.
So the biggest thing with Berthoud is obviously off of our leadership, so obviously Sergeant Anderson in there, is he inspires his deputies to take interest in the town that they police, so to speak, right? It's almost like policing or like, hey, you know, his rules to his guys are like, you need to be involved, like you live in this town, even if you don't live in this town. So deputies over time of working down here have been assigned here since April of 2019. Have just seen the increase as Berthoud obviously grows of crime. Vehicle trespasses, construction thefts, that kind of thing. And then he inspires his guys to be able to go out and look for technology that could help better serve our citizens or interdict this stuff as it coming through the town, especially where Berthoud is geographically located. Sometimes it is what's called a pass-through city or a pass-through town in between like Longmont, Greeley, Denver metro area where criminals will pass through to try and go, and then they're looking at small town. Maybe people don't lock their cars. maybe stuff's free for the picking, or like, hey, this is small, there's no way they have that many cops on. So that was the goal when looking at this technology of what can we do to better serve our citizens to solve some of these crimes that come through. So just to put it in perspective, normal property crimes, you're roughly looking at without like someone getting a license plate, you're roughly looking at around 40% of a success rate of solving. Or if you get a license plate reader and a license plate, you're looking at up into the 80s of actually identifying a suspect and going. So that's a huge drive behind this, because those quality of life crimes are what really affects people, right? Because if a car gets stolen from someone, they might look at it and be like, that car's $5,000, but that could cost that family more than that, and not being able to get their kids to school, missing work, going down the rabbit hole of now I can't pay my mortgage because now I had to buy a new car, and that snowball just comes down where it puts people in a bad spot. So fighting these quality of life crimes as far as property crime was a huge push, especially because that's what Berthoud saw the most of versus like person crimes or violent crime as we kind of progressed. So that's kind of how the technology came around. We've been using these things for a little bit, but a lot of it was just staying up to date on technology that's coming around and seeing the successes of towns that are around Berthoud size in other states, and especially talking with Castle Rock where they're like, we maybe get this where people were like, oh, there's no crime here, there's no way, and then Castle Rock is getting all these recoveries, and now they've said it's gone down a little bit, but that's because criminals are talking and they're saying, hey, we're gonna avoid Castle Rock because we keep driving through and these cameras keep getting us, and then now we're getting interdicted by law enforcement when obviously their goal is to go undetected for that side of it. So that's kind of the drive behind it, is just trying to do what we can as a sheriff's office to police and solve the crimes in the town and take interest in that. And obviously the now retired Sheriff Justin Smith saw use in it and liked the oversight that was with this company and felt that this was the one to at least try and see what it does. Obviously, if at the end of the demo that changes and we want to look at a different direction, then that's where we go. But at least trying and seeing what this can do for the community is the big drive of trying to get this, especially down in Berthoud, as a foothold for it. Where we just saw a lot of complaints because we work with our communities, right? And have that interaction with them where they're like, we gotta do something about this, is there anything that we can do? So this is an option for us to do that basically puts a cop, so to speak, at an intersection or on a street, just sitting there running plates as much as they can. Versus where in the old, without those, we'd have to just hopefully catch a suspect as it's leaving, but obviously that has some lag time of where we're responding from, all those kind of reasons. So at least this can at least provide a tip as we move along to hopefully solve some of these cases, and get people back their property, or suspects back, in custody where they can start seeing some restitution and we can start to close that wound of that vulnerableness that comes from it when a house gets broken into, a car gets stolen, or a car gets broken into, right? It feels very personally violating, and the sheriff's office takes a huge interest, especially the Berthoud squad, in making sure that that violation doesn't extend by being like, hey, we couldn't solve it, this is just gonna sit and go into a cold case. Or at least now we can say we've done everything that we can, we found a plate and this is kind of the dead end where we hit. It's still gonna go under investigation, we're still looking into it, but at least we can take those steps into progressing that, and I feel like that answer is at least better when talking to victims of crime, that hey, this is kind of where we hit and talking about the investigation, and that we looked on this plate, but this car has passed hands so many times, we're gonna keep working at it, but like at least we have a starting point, whereas without these things, in a majority of these cases we took, we're like, hey, you got a license plate? And they're like, nope, and then it's like, okay, now we're kind of done unless we recover it on another stop, and sometimes that could take years later where we're recovering that property. Whereas now we had a stolen vehicle case that was taken from Love's. That vehicle was automatically entered into this, and it actually entered Wichita, and we recovered it in less than a day. So that victim was able to get that car back, and that victim was using that to get back on his feet after getting filed from oil work. So getting that vehicle back to him was a huge in recovering that, where average recovery time of a stolen car is 30 days plus, or in this case it was a half a day. Obviously every case is gonna be different, but that's the goal of trying to use this, is hopefully get some of those wins and get some stuff back to some people, and obviously suspects charged and into custody, and start that process.
Thank you, that's super insightful, and also thank you to the Berthoud squad for being so invested in the people here, that that it's personal for you guys and you go that extra step is a big deal. And I know a lot of us have heard about the uptick in vehicle thefts and the crimes, and so thank you for the creativity and even just proposing and presenting something that's going to help kind of alleviate that pain, like you're saying that the community is experiencing is a big deal, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Trustee Butler?
Thank you. Most of my questions have already been answered, so thanks everyone. Couple follow-up. So I understand this is just an informational presentation, which is very good, thank you. But I guess I'm a little curious, is this eventually gonna be an ask for additional budget, or does this fit within our contract with Renville County? And maybe staff could answer this a little better.
I think after this demo period, we'll have an opportunity to come back in front of you and talk about how we go either keep the system and continue forward, how we fund that, whether we fund that individually, we buy speed cameras, for instance, that then the sheriff's department can use, or we incorporate it into the cost of the service they provide under contract with us. I think we'll have a couple of different options.
Okay.
But we'll need to come back to you at some point and decide if you wanna do that, and if so, have you confirm how you want us to do that.
Another question, how did you guys land on 14 cameras? Was there, I assume, some rhyme and reason to strategically placing them?
Yep.
I'm just curious.
So this company has current technicians that work for them, as well as ex-law enforcement that works for them, that is like hands-on worked with these companies from all over the United States. So the manager that's overseeing this project actually came from the San Francisco area and ran a real-time crime information center where this came from. So they're able to kind of look at what we have. We were able to provide data to them and talk with them one-on-one. They came down here, Matt gave us a demo, and then we were able to sit down as a squad, myself, Sergeant Anderson, Lieutenant Badberg, and tell them like, hey, this is kind of where we see the need of it. These are where our hot spots of crime have been occurring on crime stats that we have over the past couple years. Where do we put these things? And then it kind of hashed out from there. So obviously getting them into a neighborhood was big on the demo because that helps these HOAs decide like, now that this company's big and supplying to HOAs, is this something that we want to look at where we're gonna pay for that camera, but then the sheriff's office gets access as soon as they say, yes, you guys can have access to this camera. Or they decide to pay for it and keep it within themselves and then just contact us if they have a crime and provide that one specific data set of like one specific car that is maybe a suspect to us. So obviously that's an option when it hits the private entity side. But looking at the cameras was just putting it on one, main thoroughfares that heavy traffic volume are gonna go by, and two, trying to figure out what main routes suspects are gonna come in and take the town into it to commit crimes, and putting those on high volume areas where we can start to at least get leads off of that. And then the company's also looking at like, do we put it at here and here where we know that if this stolen car passes and it doesn't alert on this camera, that it probably went into this neighborhood that only has one way in, one way out, where deputies can make some better decisions when we interdict this car to hopefully prevent a pursuit, where we put spike strips down. All those kind of things all goes into account when we talked with them about where we put it. Countywide, there's 54 cameras that are going in, and a lot of that data was off of that, as well as like where are our crime hubs, where would these be most useful? And the company's like, we gotta get these on roads that we know that they're gonna take, or where you guys have crime, because if we put it on some street that doesn't count, that might get it, but you're not gonna see the amount of successes that we do. So on average, roughly with the cameras they're in right now, we're averaging about 500,000 vehicle reads a month. So that's just the amount of traffic volume that's passing those as it's going by. So a lot of that is just figured out what roads are main highways, and obviously kind of putting them at intersections around town that we could just know they're gonna pass, that hopefully lead to leads for it, or that deputies are able to get into the area rather quickly and interdict whatever's passing them versus a long distance of like drive time where we just miss it and then that vehicle escapes, or that one in party escapes, or that Amber Alert vehicle gets into the city of Loveland and now we have no idea where it's at.
Thank you. Last question, I assume when you have 554 in the county, and you have some, jurisdictional, I guess, interagencies with, you have a case, you input the information, this flags it in Castle Rock. is it cross alerted?
It
The whole
is.
system?
Yep, so it's actually nationwide alerted. So basically we could enter it into a database, even if it's a suspect vehicle that I'm wanting to enter. Deputies have the ability to enter it with case numbers and information about why we're looking for this car into Flock's database. So like, let's say this car, we'll use the Wichita example because that's local. I entered it into there, said, hey, this is our suspect description. We identified this guy. He has multiple warrants for his arrest. Drop a photo in there of him, dropped a photo of the car, entered my case number, my contact info, and then as soon as that car entered into Wichita, they not only got the NCIC alert, which is the nationwide crime information center that talks to all the states when we enter things. They also got the Flock one that says, hey, here's some more info, please contact Deputy Anderson if you interdicted this. So I got a call from a Wichita detective that's like, hey, we got your car, there's no damage, and we also got the guy into custody. He's gonna be charged with these various crimes that they had him on from a little crime spree that he was on. What do you wanna do as far as your stuff? And then that's where we're able to talk in the process of writing warrants and things like that for our criminal charges in Berthoud, to where those go over into different states, whereas without these, talking to other agencies is very hard unless we know specifically that that car went in, and now it kind of takes that guesswork out of it.
I was curious, without them contacting you, would you have known otherwise? Would the system have notified you that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, so I have the ability to search it and then it lets me know. You can set up like email alerts, so basically I just got an email that, hey, your car passed this camera in Wichita, and then shortly thereafter I got a phone call from them saying, hey, we got your car, it's in good shape, what do you want done with it? And then we kind of talked about like, hey, this is where it's going, this guy can't pay for a tow, we get it, and they're like, no worries, we'll just tow it to our evidence lot, that's a no cost thing, no different than us. And then you just tell them to contact us or try and get out here somehow, and we'll release that to them where there's not that tow fee added to it. So obviously having that contact was super helpful in this case, cause last we wanna do is have that guy pay for a tow bill for weeks or however long it takes him to get out there to recover that thing when he's already down on his feet. But obviously if they didn't interdict it right away, I would have alerted, at least saw that it passed that camera. And then if I don't hear anything, I can start contacting that agency and be like, hey, what's going on with this car? This is our vested interest in this. And they can kind of walk through either it got away or what kind of happened on their end of it.
Right, okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I'll try to make mine a little bit more speedy because I did have a lot of these questions answered. So I know at the beginning you said these are not speed traps, these are not monitoring citizens, so even though, say I'm walking down the street, it can still see you, but it's not gonna identify anything about anybody walking down the street one way or another?
Correct, so it's motion activated, but it's the engineers teach this camera to learn what vehicles look like. So like the back of a Chevy Silverado versus the back of a Ford F-150. Because it wants to rely off of that, because as we know, criminals will sometimes take plates off and put other plates on. Whereas now when I search for, oh sweet, Prairie Star just had a burglary, we know it's a white Ford truck around this year, I can enter that stuff into the system with my case number and it will give me every white Ford truck where I can look at it and be like, well, that wasn't the right plate, but at least now we have another lead to go off of for that side of it. So it takes photos of everything, but it's not like used for people wise, right? The biggest things it'll actually take a photo of is like golf carts and then rears of bicycles, cause it thinks that's like a motorcycle as it goes by, but those get all filtered into basically a golf cart bank, if you will, under the time of like, we're gonna push this out because that's not what you guys are looking for when we start entering what we're looking for into there.
Okay. Are these things at all possible to be like repurposed, say, as speed traps? Is that a thing that this company would do? Do you know if it could do that sort of thing?
Nope, so the sole thing that this camera can do is basically just take photos of vehicles as it passes and then talk to those criminal databases that we use that basically tell law enforcement only if it's stolen, if there's a warrant connected, if it's used in an Amber Alert or used in another crime. It doesn't do speed, radar, or anything like that. It's solely used just to recover stolen cars and wanted suspects in kidnapping and then produce leads off of cases that we might not have leads on the get-go if we just have a surveillance video of it and it's a generic looking car. Now that provides, well, we got a generic car, that ring video was at 2 in the morning, let's go look at the camera that would be closest to that neighborhood. Oh sweet, there's my car, right in that reasonable drive time frame. And then deputies are able to use that to start following up and progressing that case more. Whereas in the past, deputies would look at that and be like, that's great, blast it out to everyone on patrol, hey, keep an eye out for this, but most of the time, if it's a generic car, it's like, dang it, we can't tell that one from the other unless it's got stickers or something on that, or you get a plate for that side of it.
Gotcha, okay. In terms of, you said earlier, public requests are allowed, I'm assuming you have to go to their website and apply.
Yep, so they have a PIO team that releases all that, so you just have to contact them and they go from there. It's still new in the process, they actually have portals and databases that they can set up for agencies that they can link to websites. Obviously with the sheriff transition, that's something that we just need to talk about now, Sheriff Payne, of what he wants to see with this and where he wants to take it. For that side of it as far as the public transparency, but the company has access to all that they can release that stuff as it goes. The portal will just make it a little easier as that comes down.
Okay, and I know earlier you said as well, a lot of this information lives on Flock's database and not the LCSO's database.
Correct.
Is there a concern with chain of custody on that in terms of information?
Nope, so any criminal case that is taken from that, deputies have the ability to click a button that then downloads into our evidence database where we have to enter case numbers and then I have to start entering a lot more data. So who I am, where I recovered it from, what time I took it from, the location, that kind of stuff, that then now that enters into evidence and becomes a permanent record for that case that we're gonna be prosecuting down the road, where it'll have things like code in the photos that they can go back, and if a defense attorney's like, that's not my client, that photo was taken on this roadway, that data, the metadata behind that photo is sent as soon as we download it into our evidence file, so then we can go back and be like, nope, this metadata behind this photo shows that this was taken on this date and time. There's other safety cues like Flock's logo in the photos, as well as GPS location or what camera took it, the name, location, and then the date and time as well. But all that gets dumped into a photo of it. And obviously the only reason for deputies to be entering that stuff or taking photos from that website is for evidence purposes. You can't download it either other way. It has to just automatically go into what's a different database that we have, which is just ran by Axon, which then goes to the agency's retention policy for court cases where the DA can just access it right away for that side of it. So that's kind of what saves and protects the chain of custody. Is that obviously it will get called in question, right? They'll have to bring in text from the company and say, hey, please talk about your security protocols. But then also downloading it right away saves it, because now we have two of the same as that goes. And then once that passes 30 days, if we still need to extend that and retain it, we have internal records that then get released to the courts that, hey, we retain this longer for evidence purposes because the court case is still progressing, or the defendant is starting to file motions where that stuff has to get retained for a certain amount of time beyond that 30 days.
Good. Actually, that was, next question I was gonna have is, is 30 days a hard limit, so if something would pass, but you actually just answered that, so thank you for that. In terms of camera system expansion, hypothetically say, we go forward with this, working out great, but you guys are like, hey, we found a couple holes, we need to patch this. Is that something where you would come back to us and say, hey, we need to install 4 more? Or because it's been approved here, we just kind of build it into the budget and it just goes from there?
Obviously, the goal right now is there's a money value and a camera amount, a term to this demo as it goes on. But obviously, the goal is to always come back to you guys and ask like, hey, this is the ideas, these are where we're at. And then provide updates to the town administrator on our successes. We're trying to get a dashboard going where you guys should be able to just look at one dashboard where you all can see the database. That's just in the works right now. That's new, of trying to get that going, so then you guys can see live updates of like success cases, how many reads, that kind of stuff. But obviously if we come down towards the 60-day limit, once that clock starts going, the company contacts us month before and say, hey, your demo ends on this day. What do you guys wanna do? We're obviously gonna come back and have those conversations of what we wanna do. But then the company is no fault of their own, said, hey, listen, we just wanna be invested and see what you guys wanna do. If at the end of this you guys can't afford it, that is no skin off our back. We just take our equipment and you guys can have access to the database for the other agencies around you. And if you wanna just pay for one camera and start there, then that's where we start there. Same thing with HOAs, if those are in their neighborhood and they'd like to pay for those, they can also have those conversations with the company and then take those over. So it's very much consumer friendly as far as like how many cameras we keep, where we go, but those conversations will be had. Obviously, we're not just gonna make the decision, hey, get ready to get 50,000 more of your budget, these cameras are staying, right? Like those conversations need to happen, because money affects everything as we go through. And the last thing we wanna do is make that decision where it drastically affects other aspects of it. Where right now it's just a demo to see what this can do, for at least our wheelhouse of what we deal with on a daily basis.
I guess last question, with this technology, is this something that, I guess, multiple layers of question, but ultimately, is it something where you'll be able to have a camera kind of looking over 25, reading license plates off of that, or is that outside of jurisdiction?
Nope, so all these things go into effect that obviously these cameras need to stay in our wheelhouse of it, so they need to stay in our jurisdictional boundaries. If we decide that, hey, we want a camera on the interstate because we think that would be good and we wanna spread these things out more, then those conversations would just be had with CDOT. But also the state patrol, due to auto theft increasing in the state, is also looking at this company after seeing the successes and the transparency that this has with the public and just the different stuff that versus old ALPR companies that kind of kept it internal and there was no oversight and no public investment available, that they're looking at this company to be like, what can we do to better serve the state as a whole since they cover those roadways? So kind of as we progress and this company gets bigger, I think more agencies will get them and it'll kind of fill in some of those gaps where a certain jurisdiction won't have to have that many cameras, cause now we have some other options, especially with the information sharing that Northern Colorado does as a whole as a law enforcement community, more than other states or even more than the metro area as far as our willingness to work with whoever, just to solve the crimes, because criminals have no jurisdiction boundaries and we feel like we shouldn't either, but obviously we have to deal with what's in our wheelhouse, but having those partnerships is what goes a long way to be able to extend those jurisdictional boundaries to be able to solve some of these crimes as we go along.
Absolutely, okay. That's all I have, thank you.
Well, all mine were answered plus some. Yeah, so you said 50,000, it looked like my math roughly 43,000 for 14.
35 is what I got, but yeah.
Yep, should be around like 35,000. And like a perspective, the
Public school.
54 cameras that are in right now would cost roughly about $109,000 a year. Obviously, there's like getting that many of 54 of them costs a lot, right? And this company is very pro, like you guys start with whatever you want to. If it's done and you wanna come back a couple years later, feel free for that side of it, but they are about $2,500 a piece per year. And then there's some other fees that go along if we mount a camera and then we decide to move it, there's just a fee, cause now they gotta send a technician out to make sure that camera's mounted properly and go down those routes. So obviously there's some fees on the back end, but at least up front for that side of it.
Before we just go to comments real quick, we're 15 minutes behind schedule, but I did promise to open it up to anyone in the public. Does anyone have a burning question for Deputy Anderson regarding this? It will be coming back to us, which I feel good about. Okay, well, general comments, you feel good? Trustee Murphy, we'll start with you.
I would briefly say I'm generally supportive of this technology, but I'd strongly encourage the sheriff's department to release their policy on use to the public. I think it's really important that we're transparent and respecting the privacy of our good citizens here. So that's all I have to say.
Okay,
I'd second that.
any comments over there? Ben?
I just would say that I feel like the trust relationship between our town and the sheriff's department, it's critical in matters like this and any type of law enforcement agency where if we trust you guys that you have integrity and that you really are doing the right things with this type of software and data, then we can trust that it's gonna be used for good and I know that exists between the sheriff's office and the town of Berthoud and its citizens, so I feel like we can move forward and see how you guys feel about it and trust that feedback you'll give us, so thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I would agree with the comments that are made. Generally, I'm skeptical of this kind of thing, but I understand the utility of it. my skepticism comes in the fact that surveillance has been misused in the past, right? So that's a large fear of mine. Another, I guess, concern that I have is sort of towards Trustee Grace's comment about it developing into something else. And so, once again, if the trust is there, if this kind of surveillance is going to be used for obvious and very open public good, then that is what it is, especially if the numbers keep being provided, the numbers provided are continued. But that's my comment. I'm concerned about it basically snowballing into, well, this worked, let's do something else now that is on top of this kind of surveillance. And that is the foundation of most of my concerns. But thank you for your presentation, that was really informative.
Okay. I'll just say, yeah, I was a little skeptical at first too, and then you talking about how it only addresses the license plate, and you guys chose like the most restrictive contractor, it seems like, that has that 30-day policy. And after having my truck stolen and the trailer stolen in 1 year from Berthoud, yeah, I could see the utility and the value in it. So I look forward to this coming back and see how the rest of the trial goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, we can roll right into, and for the public here, you might be interested in the future or the rest of the presentations, but feel free to take off whenever you need to. I don't feel obligated to stay to the end at all. Our next agenda item is the oil and gas regulations, and this is by Attorney Mike Foot.
So
2,500 times 14.
I'll do it right here.
I know, you're right. I just did it in my head right after. Where did I get 45? It's because of sneaking in extra cameras.
I mean, after taxes, it's a Ticketmaster thing. They're just gonna loop it all in.
Yeah.
It's gonna double your cost just for the convenience factor alone. It's like buying a book at the airport. I don't even like
That's so
books that
true.
much. Like I like
Everything at the
reading. I
airport-
just don't wanna read a $50 book when it's a Tom Clancy novel. That's all I have.
Yep. Atlantic Monthly.
Okay,
Welcome,
good
Attorney
evening. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here after a holiday hiatus. We're back to oil and gas.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone's very excited about that, and but it's, as you know, it's an important topic, and I think we're making progress. I hope that after the presentation tonight that you all can give some direction and we can move on to the next tranche of the oil and gas regulations here that we're proposing. What I wanna do is I wanna just go over, just kind of briefly, the information. You obviously have information in your packet, and so you can follow along there. I don't intend to do a PowerPoint slideshow for very long, but it'll just set the table for further discussion, questions that you have, or ultimately, hopefully, some kind of direction. So the outline of this particular presentation is that first I'll just do a quick review of the process. You, I think, are familiar with the process, but because we had that holiday hiatus, it's always good to remind everybody of where we are and what's going on with the process, as well as the public. Review of what we're doing with tranche one, and that's part of the process, the first part of the process. Give you just an overview of what has been proposed as being the new ordinance when it's all said and done. Then talk about the setback language, and then talk about the reciprocal setback language and some of the areas for discussion there. So again, just a review of the process that we've talked about before. The new oil and gas regulations are, they can be complicated, and so what I had proposed and what you all seemed to think was a good idea was to break this into 3 tranches. The first tranche is what we're still dealing with, which is location. The second tranche will be, it'll be more extensive as far as there'll be some more pages of regulations, but it's about the health and safety regulations for those particular oil and gas locations that may be approved as part of the new process. And then the third and final tranche would be the process of going through evaluation and either approval or denial or conditioning of any permits that come to the town, and enforcement and a few other miscellaneous items in the third tranche. And then ultimately, the goal, of course, is to have a new ordinance. So tranche one location deals with setbacks of new oil and gas facilities from existing buildings, setbacks of new oil and gas facilities from other features like apartment buildings, water, perhaps public places. And then it deals with reciprocal setbacks, which are setbacks of new buildings from existing oil and gas locations. I'm just putting this proposed outline in front of you to kind of show you where in the new ordinance this particular tranche would fall under. And you can also see some of the other topics that we'll have to deal with. One thing I'll flag for you is that in your packet, in the Word document that ended up in your packet, I've, for some strange reason, highlighted section 105 and section 106 as being tranche one, but when I look back at it before putting this presentation together, it's really section 106 and 107. So I don't know why I made that mistake, but I'll just flag it that we're really talking about 106 and 107, which is in the red text here, and that's tranche number one. The other thing I'll highlight for you on this slide is that you see here that's something that's underlined and also in yellow highlight about informed consent. That comes from, and that'll be also consistent with the slideshow, the rest of the slides here about the language. That comes from trustee feedback, staff feedback, and as well as perhaps a decision point or at least a discussion point for you all. And what this means here is that initially, I did not have anything about informed consent in the new ordinance outline, but because of trustee feedback, I think that it's something that should be considered, if not necessarily in tranche one at some point in time. So I wanted to add that to the outline for you all to take a look at. And really what I mean by informed consent is that deals with setbacks where, let's say that you have a surface owner that has a house, that person's house that's say within 1,500 feet of a proposed new oil and gas location, and they own the surface and they want to execute a surface agreement with the oil and gas company, but it's still 1,500 feet, whereas the setback is 2,000 feet. That particular surface owner in other localities as well as in the state process can give informed consent and say, we realize that this is closer than what the setback would allow for, but we're giving consent for it to be closer because it's our land and we've executed a surface agreement with the operator. So going over just really quick some of the sections, and then my intent is to come back and maybe have some additional questions or discussion about these sections, but I just wanted to highlight some of them. This first section is 106A, and you'll notice there's nothing highlighted on this. And the reason why I did not highlight anything on this is because based on the trustee feedback that we did receive as well as staff discussion, it seemed like people were okay with this. And okay with this meaning that any new oil and gas locations would be located in only certain zones, not any zone like a residential zone or any kind of business zone other than doing the agricultural district, light industrial, and industrial districts. So, of course, if there is disagreement about that now or later, then that's open for discussion. But again, based on the feedback that we did receive, it seemed like that most people, or at least the people that gave feedback, were on board with this. So nothing is highlighted in this particular slide. But going on to section 106C, the highlights here are some of the areas that you may want to discuss, again, based on trustee feedback. What I ended up doing here is I placed in the highlights, particularly here on this slide for section 106C with 2,000 feet, I guess I'll kind of loosely categorize that as being council's recommendation. And the reason why I came up with this 2,000 feet here in this particular slide is because what I get the sense from this board is that you're looking for something that's protective. You're looking for something that's legally defensible, but also not necessarily something that's groundbreaking. And again, if I'm maybe not getting that correct, then I'm happy to have further discussion about that. But you're looking for something that has been done in other localities, but also is on the protective side. And 2,000 feet for setbacks, I think, really falls within those categories. Other localities have adopted a 2,000-foot setback. It is amongst those localities that have looked at setback as well as the COGCC. It's as protective as many have gone. Certainly, there's always been debate about setbacks and will continue to be debate about setbacks. Others may think that it should go farther. And perhaps with the public comment that you receive, you may or may not receive that kind of comment. But the 2,000 feet is not necessarily a universal number at this point, but it's been pretty heavily adopted by other local jurisdictions. So it's not really going out on a limb. It is legally defensible in my opinion, but it also is protective, certainly more protective than setbacks used to be. The statewide setback before Senate Bill 181 was at 500 feet. And so now the statewide standard is somewhere between 500 feet and 2,000 feet, depending on the circumstance and exceptions. And localities, particularly the ones that we've looked at, like Broomfield, for example, have set a 2,000 foot setback. The reason why I highlighted on this slide the public trails and trailheads is because there was one trustee that gave feedback that said that maybe we didn't need to have 2,000 foot setback from public trails and trailheads because people were only there temporarily and not for any long period of time. So I just wanted to highlight that for possible discussion if folks had any thoughts about that. Going on to the next slide, which is 106D. Again, this is a setback from water supply, streams, rivers, etc. Again, the 2,000 foot represents, for lack of a better term, council's recommendation as being a protective setback, one that's legally defensible but doesn't put you out on a limb. There has been another jurisdiction at least that we've taken a look at, in this case, Superior, that has adopted a 2,000 foot setback from water. And it also is consistent with the 2,000 foot setback from residences, which was in the prior slide under 106C. The next slide under 106E, this deals with off-location flow lines and gathering lines. And the 150 feet, again, I think goes into this category of being protective, being along the lines of what other jurisdictions have done, and legally defensible. Okay, moving on to reverse setbacks or reciprocal setbacks. Same kind of drill here, but this is under section 107A or proposed section 107A. We have reciprocal setbacks of 2,000 feet, again, as a recommendation for the period of time where the new well is not entered into completions, is not begin production. So the period of time that before the well is entered into production is considered more of a dangerous time. Certainly after the well enters into production, it's not like there's no danger or risk, but it's generally established that it's reduced at that point in time. So what we see in the other jurisdictions that have dealt with this is that it's almost like a step-down system where they have a longer setback period before production begins, and then after production begins, then they go down to a lesser setback, because also when you're looking at land use, that period can be 20 or 30 years. And so if you're looking at a 2,000 foot setback for 30 years, that obviously has some implications for being able to use that property for any other use. But if you reduce it down to say 500 feet, then that allows more property to be put into use. That's the land use consideration, as well as the protection and the safety consideration, where it's a little bit less of a concern once the well is entered into production. But again, just to emphasize, it's not no concern. It's not like there's no risk at that point in time. Under 107B, it's pretty much, it's kind of the same thing. It's a little bit different of category. This specifies that there shouldn't be any building units that are constructed within 2,000 feet for 1 year after production begins. This is a bit of a random number, 1 year, but it also is one that some other jurisdictions have settled on. Again, it goes back to the same consideration that after the well enters into production, particularly for a year after it enters into production, the risk is perceived at the risk, and I think in many cases it does go down, but it's not eliminated. So you have all the way from the period before the drilling starts to 1 year after production, could be a 2,000 foot reciprocal setback, and then after a year after it goes into production, then you could adopt a tier down type of a setback, reciprocal setback. So these numbers that I've highlighted here, for after the well goes into production, it could be something either 250 feet, 500 feet, somewhere in between. These exceptions that we have here are exceptions that deal with residential units or lots that have been platted prior to the adoption of this ordinance. And so if there's been a new neighborhood platted or there's been residences already constructed, clearly this ordinance is not gonna apply to those just because of the timing of the new ordinance. So you might wanna consider adding this in just to be explicit about it, to make sure that a new ordinance doesn't interfere with any kind of vested rights that have already occurred. And then the next tier down would be once the location is actually plugged and abandoned. Again, this could be 30 years after the well is initially drilled. Could be less, maybe even a little bit more, but still a fair amount of time. The tier down could be 250 feet here. That's been what other jurisdictions have looked at. I think maybe generally it's between 150 and 200 feet or 250 feet. There's less risk once the well has been plugged and abandoned, but again, no risk. There are examples of plugged and abandoned wells that have had to be replugged or leaked. I wouldn't say it's extensive evidence, but when you're talking about a well that maybe was plugged 30 years ago, there certainly could be issues with having to go in and replug it. So you want to give yourself enough space for that kind of issue to occur and also for a crew to come in and replug it. So 250 feet seems to be kind of the sweet spot here where people of other jurisdictions have fallen, so you wouldn't be going out on a limb, but also could be sufficiently protective once the well is plugged and abandoned. And then there is setbacks for any flow or gathering lines under the reciprocal setbacks as well. Again, 150 feet, just like it was for the off-location flow lines for the regular setbacks. So this is the last slide that I have here, just to kind of maybe give direction or ask for directions from the trustees. We could go back if you wanted to and discuss it section by section if there's any questions or if there's any discussion. Hopefully by the end of this, we can have some direction. It's not going to be binding direction. It's not a final decision by the board, but some direction so that we can put tranche one maybe over to the side and begin tranche two and then hopefully tranche three. Ultimately, the goal is to come back with an entire new ordinance based on the direction that you've given. And at that point, you could say, maybe I've changed my mind or have some other concerns here. And then ultimately, you would go through the process of adopting the final ordinance. But it seems like it'd be a good idea to try to wrap a temporary bow on tranche one and get it out of the way so we can start on tranche two. So that is that's the goal. Of course, it's up to you. If you want to do that, you're the decision makers, but that's what I'm putting out there as a suggestion.
Yeah, thanks for that guidance. Trustees, questions? So, Attorney Foote, I have the trailhead setback is a specific question that you wanted kind of discussed. And then possibly the reciprocal setback, 250 or 500 feet, what are we looking at there? Is that fair?
Yes, if you'd like to discuss that, of course, and also, as I said, with these highlighted terms, the 2,000 feet or the 500 feet, et cetera, that's council's recommendation, so, as the board of trustees, you can decide, well, we don't want to take that recommendation, but hopefully you would be able to provide some direction on that by the end of the night.
Okay, let's start off with questions. I think let's start with Trustee Butler. For Attorney
Is
Foote.
this a public meeting? We're gonna have public comment?
Sure, we can go to public comment first if you'd like.
Well, I'm just curious if that we're gonna get there.
Yeah, I told the public on every item.
Okay, so question, so I got some comments, but I'll hold those. So I personally also think that we need to consider carefully and I would add parks to public trails and trailheads to that question, if
Okay.
Do we have any I'm trying to just limit this to questions.
Yeah, no worries. We can,
I'm gonna hold that thought, sorry.
yeah, if it comes back up, just bring it up.
Right. most of these are comments. So for plugged wells, let's move down to that. We've got a placeholder of 250 setback for, reciprocal setback for plugged wells. Is that from the wellhead or the perimeter of the pad?
It could be either. But the suggestions here has been from the perimeter.
Right. Yep. What is standard necessary space? Because that's a lot of space. You look 250 from the pad and a circumference, that's big. I'm wondering if that's bigger than necessary. Do we have any empirical information or studies that show what's typical for necessary space for plugged wells to get access if needed?
Generally, what I've heard in these discussions with other localities has been that 150 is not enough because it takes space for equipment to get in order to replug a well. So it should be at least 150, but you also have to consider if it does go bad, you want to have a little bit of space there in order to account for that. If there is a well that's leaking and you have a house that's 150 feet away, I mean, empirically, I'm not sure if I have any data that shows one way or the other, but I think the question would be, would you be comfortable with that? So 250 feet gives a little bit more than 150. It would need to be at least 150 though, at least, probably a little bit more in order to be able to get equipment in to be able to replug if necessary.
From the perimeter?
Mhm.
Okay, that helps. That's the only question I have actually.
Okay, trustee Sorcelli, any questions?
I was curious about the 150 number as far as the flow line setback. Is that I'm guessing that's a standard measurement. I'm just not sure where that comes into play.
Right, and you might have already picked up with these setbacks, there's not exactly a scientific rigorous study that says it should be 110 versus 150 or 160. So many of the jurisdictions that have looked at this have come up with about that number, mainly based on comfort level and knowing that something like, say, 75 feet or 60 feet was not enough. The flow line issue was an issue that was exposed by the Firestone explosion several years ago, where the flow line was close to the house. And when it was cut, then the house ended up filling up with gas, which caused the explosion. And so that flow line, I think, was somewhere between 75 and 90 feet, if I recall correctly, which people thought that was too close, or at least many localities did. So when it comes to these setbacks, a lot of times you're considering, there's the land use consideration and there's the safety consideration. So where do people fall and where are they comfortable with? And localities that have done this, we're not comfortable with, say, 75 feet, many of them. They're more comfortable with something like 150, which doesn't put too much land off use, but still allows for more safety than, say, 75 feet.
More of a buffer.
Right, but like I said, and I just, wanna make sure that I emphasize again, there's not a correct scientific number. Really what it comes down to is what you're comfortable with. A lot of it is just a policy decision, what the community wants, what you want as leaders of the community, but also what can be defensible. And 150 feet is just where some communities have fallen, but if you all have a different sense of it and the community has a different sense, then of course, there's nothing that says that you can't go with something else, but I'm suggesting the 150 on this case.
And that leads to my next question. You mentioned several times like these are legally defensible numbers and parameters, and that's where, just on that high level, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand just personally what is defensible and what wouldn't be defensible, and where how we're deciding what that number is. Are you basically saying that there could be community members that disagree with these numbers because they're not scientifically based, and so we wanna be in some sort of parameter that says this is a good buffer and we could defend this in court? Is that, am I understanding that correctly? I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
Yes, I mean, you could have community feedback that would say, we think that 2,000 feet is too little, and feedback that could say the opposite.
Right.
The reason why I say legally defensible is because, especially with the 2,000 feet with setbacks, there is plenty of information that I outlined in one of your prior memos studies that talk about setback distances. And so if you make a finding that this is in the best interest of public health, safety, and welfare, then you're going to have some information that's going to back you up on the 2,000 feet, as well as that there have been other jurisdictions that have enacted 2,000 feet and they've not been challenged legally. And I just don't think that there's a lot of room to make that challenge and be successful. But the attorney's caveat is, you really never know, because, I mean, no one's really tried it, first of all, but it would be different if you were looking at something like a kilometer setback, that's kind of out on the limb compared to what other jurisdictions have done, what the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission has done. But 2,000 feet is right there with what many other jurisdictions and the statewide jurisdiction has done with the outer limit for their setback.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
Trustee Murphy?
Just a quick clarification on trustee Soricelli's point. So you would say from a legally defensible standpoint, it's more the strength in numbers arguments and versus maybe the scientific argument,
It would,
or a little of both?
yeah, a little of both, plus the fact that strength in numbers with the addition that it has not been challenged. And so there's lots of reasons why other jurisdictions haven't been challenged. But the bottom line is it hasn't been challenged. And so one of the possible reasons would be that it's seen as pretty defensible by those that might challenge it. Particularly on the 200-foot or 2,000-foot setback, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission in their 2020 rulemaking did a very extensive, I don't want to say that it was a study, it was more of a study of studies and a colloquy and research about what was out there. And they came to the conclusion that 2,000 feet was appropriate. They put in some exceptions, but their outer limit is 2,000 feet. So that was never challenged, and there's been probably 75 oil and gas development permits that have come through since then. So I wouldn't have too much of an issue with 2,000 feet.
That's all I've got.
Trustee Hardy?
No, I think it's going kind of around the lines of what we've asked him to do is
Okay.
give us something that's not below the bar, but not too high above the bar, but it's kind of Goldilocks.
Trustee Ayers?
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think I'm gonna have questions until after we do the health and safety.
Mayor Pro Tem?
At the very beginning, it said on 30-11-112 variances and informed consent. Is that informed consent, is that a piece that's being added to, or is that just the chapter variances and informed consent, you're just adding that in there? So there's no changes to informed consent?
Right, I put in the informed consent under 112, just for the purposes of this discussion, just to add it. And that, of course, is if you would like to consider an informed consent as being part of that. But we could add it as a subsection under 107 or 106 if you'd like to, if you're concerned about the placement. But that isn't added. Maybe what you're asking is that new? And yes, that is new based on the trustee feedback we received after last time.
Okay. I guess, was there any major changes regarding informed consent that I guess you could talk about off the top of your head, or?
Well, no, it wasn't there before.
Okay.
And so this is a new consideration, but I think it's valid, and other jurisdictions have an informed consent clause I'm not as familiar with what you all do with variances right now, but variances could cover it too. The point is that if you have a regulation that says 2,000 foot setback period, but something comes before you that is exceptional and compelling, then you could decide to have some way to account for that. It could give you extra flexibility. But then again, you may not want to do that. You might want to just say it's 2,000 feet, and if you can't get within 2,000 feet, then too bad. But that's gonna be up to you. But if you wanted to put in a variance process, which would include informed consent, you could put it in the way that I've outlined on this slide.
I was just, because I saw it highlighted and it reminded me that I didn't see it further down in any of the content, which is why I was asking. But
Okay.
no, otherwise, everything looks good. Content-wise, measurement-wise, I think kind of Goldilocks sweet spot of seems reasonable enough, given the situation, so yeah, I'm good, no questions.
I saw, my only question is, what does reclaim mean? Plugged in abandoned, I understand, is reclaimed, someone's taking this back over.
The land is reclaimed, so the land is put back to the condition it was before the drill pad came in. Reclamation, in
Okay.
other words.
And so there's no possibility of the industry ever coming back to that particular well.
Once it's reclaimed, probably not, but you
Well, I'm
know.
just wondering if we're putting 250 in and it suddenly says, I had vested rights 10 years ago, now we realize if we have the technology to go back in, but there's only a 250-foot setback after it's
Right.
reclaimed. The possibilities are very, very low that they do that.
Well, and you know, if they wanted to do that, but there's a house that's 260 feet away, then re-drilling a facility or putting in a new facility there probably wouldn't fit under that regulation because
Okay.
you have an existing house that's there
And
and
this
you
is
put
not,
in a new drill rig and it's only 260 feet away, that's gonna be
okay, cool,
problematic.
not the same rate, okay. And then 1 year, the other one was the question, reciprocal setback of 1,000 feet for 1 year, then 250 or 500 recommendations. So 1 year after production, the derrick would still be up, right? Or is everything gone and it's fracked and it's just shooting out the gas?
Yeah, the drill rig will be down.
Okay.
But there still will be facilities. Actually, maybe one way to take a look at it is this picture here.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of wells that are in this particular picture, and perhaps if a new well comes into Berthoud, it may be 5 wells instead of 12 or whatever's represented in this picture. But this is the kind of equipment you would see that's left behind for
Okay.
production.
But the one, yeah, I guess what I saw in Windsor was like big butane spikes, or it was methane, but the derrick was up, so that, you're
Yeah.
saying that's when the,
You would
Most
not
of the
see
health-
this.
yeah, okay. Cool.
After production begins, you would not see this. When there's a well is being plugged in abandoned, there's something that looks like a derrick, but it's smaller. But that's only up for the period that it takes for them to plug the well.
Those are my only questions. I'll open it up to the public, if you have any questions or comments that would help the board out. If anyone in the audience wishes to speak tonight, please come to the front and state your name and address, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Leslie Tassie, I live at 945 North 4th Street. I wanted to thank Mike Foote for all the time he's spent on this presentation, in the trenches, which I have to look up. I still don't know what that means, but anyway, I just need to say, I just need to ask why. What is the point of this? Because I feel like it's a waste of time for Bertha to even consider. I think that what my feeling is, or my hunch is that you're doing this for the protection of Berthoud. I'm hoping that that's what it's about. When I printed this out, before I came to the meeting tonight, and I read it, and there's a sentence in here that says, just at the very beginning on under A, it says, the town may deny a new location permit if it determines the proposed location is not consistent with the protection of health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. And to that, I have to say, there is no location that is consistent with the protection of these items. None. I think that looking at the big picture, we're destroying the environment, we're destroying the air, and I'm wondering why we're even thinking about, why can't we, Berthoud, be the exception to the rule and say, our regulation is no oil and gas will be drilled here. I don't want to become another Loveland. What's going on in Loveland? And you know how I feel about this. And I will be speaking about it till the day I die. But I love this town and I want to protect this town. And I've been watching a lot of presentations about what happens to the water and what happens to the wildlife and what happens to our lungs and our health. And there is no reason that Berthoud has to join in and be pressured by the COGCC. I don't want it to be about money. I want it to be about the people that live here. I want to be proud that we're doing something different. Thanks.
Thank you, Leslie. Is there anyone else in the audience or online? All right, I'll bring it back to the board for a little discussion on this. If you'd like to reply to Ms. Tassi, I guess I think in general that was a subjective questions or is there any, yeah,
Well, clearly, this is a policy decision that is in your province. I think that certainly the comparison jurisdictions that we looked at, and that would have been COGCC is statewide, but even more relevant, Erie, Broomfield, Superior, and Larimer County have looked at, variants of this issue about should there be the possibility of drilling under certain conditions? Should we not allow drilling at all? The latter part is untested, whether or not that actually would pass court muster. As an attorney, I can just tell you that there's no court case that explores any kind of a local jurisdiction that has not allowed drilling whatsoever. Mainly because there's really no jurisdiction that has done that at this point. The closest that has occurred has been Longmont, but they did that through agreement, and the operator that they were working with decided to drill outside of town limits. So there still was drilling that occurred in minerals that were underneath the town of Longmont, but the surface disturbance was outside of the town limits. So, and in one of the presentations that I did before, I spoke a little bit about some of the policy areas that occurred prior to Senate Bill 181, which included a fracking ban that was passed by the people of the town of Longmont, which ultimately was overturned by the Supreme Court, but then Senate Bill 181 passed, and so now we're in this place where certainly there's more protections that towns have been able to enact, but no town has gone as far as saying no fracking whatsoever up to this point. So it's untested. But if you all wanted to go there, then certainly we can talk about that and we can talk about that further. But if what you wanted to do instead is come up with regulations that are protective, legally defensible, but also in that Goldilocks spot, I suppose, for lack of a better way of putting it, then that's what I think that you have in front of you. So I guess that's probably the best kind of way that I can answer that.
Well, the setbacks we've been talking about here, I think you've given us this diagram or illustration once before, where you took a picture of the town. You said, this is what it would look like with 150 foot, this is what it would look like with 250, 500, 2,000. That would kind of help explain this a little bit better for us, because ultimately, I think if the setbacks are set to a point, it almost would look like Longmont's policy of, well, based on the setbacks, you have to build outside the city limits.
Yes, it was town staff that did put together those maps for you that we've seen in the past, and so I haven't seen one that reflects this particular proposal. But I suspect what you would see is that under this proposal, the places within the town that drilling could occur would be fairly limited.
Yeah.
And then the language that was highlighted by the public commenter also is designed to give the Board of Trustees maximum discretion, so that even if there's a permit that comes before you that checks all the boxes, if you still feel after the discussion and the testimony presented that it still isn't sufficiently protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife, you still could deny the permit. So that ultimately is gonna have to be a board decision to do that, but the point of this would be to allow you to say that and to provide maximum protections that also are in that Goldilocks spot.
Thanks. Is it safe to say, board, we can just address this right off, that I think we've had this discussion on a total ban. I agree with you, but I think we've kind of moved on past that point to get Attorney Foote.
Well, I think that's
Or you
where
wanted
we
to
put the
discuss
right
that?
policies in place.
So we agree,
Rather
okay,
than
that's,
saying it's a total ban, our policies kind of create that environment like what Longmont has, where it basically pushes all the drilling rigs to the outside of city limits. Because once it's outside city limits, we have no say really.
so it sounds like we're okay with proceeding with Attorney Foote on this policy, okay, cool. Alright, so we can get to some of these questions here. The trailhead setback of 2,000 feet, was that for 1 year? That was it? No, it's always gonna be 2,000 feet, right? No, for 1 year, well, yeah.
And again, remember this setback is for new oil and gas facilities, right? Like if somebody comes in for a permit, they won't be able to apply for a permit. It will both have to be in the appropriate zoning district and 2,000 feet away from all of these things.
Right, that's for discussion for new facilities.
Should it be, yeah, right, 2,000 feet away from the
2,000 feet,
trail.
and I think trustee Butler was the one that brought up the public parks as well,
Right.
I believe, so. But yes, so just so we're clear, the slide that I'm on is slide 7 of 17, which is 106C. I think that's what you're on as well, the 2,000 feet from residential units, property lines of schools, childcare centers, property line of athletic fields, auditoriums, amphitheaters, hospitals, event centers, recreational facilities, nursing homes, life care institutions, public parks, public trails and trailheads. And so it's an extensive list. And what I would say about that is the public parks, public trails and trailheads, this has been a topic of some discussion in other jurisdictions that have looked at this, and several have adopted the public parks, public trails and trailheads, which is why I put it in here. But I think the point is well taken that people are only there temporarily, and not, say, living there. But that also could be said about athletic fields, auditoriums, recreational facilities, et cetera. So if the board is concerned about the potential health impacts of oil and gas, particularly that's going through the pre-production phases, which in my opinion, there are health effects that can occur, acute and chronic, then you may want to consider keeping that in there, but I do understand the distinction, so it's probably gonna come down to, again, more of just what you feel and a policy decision there.
Trustee Murphy, you need clarification?
Yeah, just to clarify for the board, I was the one that brought that up in the email. And it was specifically directed towards the public trails because it is kind of transitory use. I'm fine with the language as is, I just thought it was a point that was certainly worth discussing. Because it does differentiate in my mind, versus those other uses.
Yeah, I see that. What is the reverse reciprocal setback for those spaces, public areas? I don't see it labeled.
It's not listed.
So it could
Under
be
the
pretty
reciprocal.
right next to it.
Right. So, that's a little bit different because if you were to put a trailer or trailhead there, then you would know the facility is there. So you're already kind of knowing what you're dealing with when you're planning where the trailhead is going to be or the public trail. As opposed to if there's a public trail or a trailhead that's already there, and then you have an oil and gas facility coming in after that. That's the distinction there.
So would anyone, I guess we could poll if we need to, but does anyone like to discuss lowering that number? I'm fine with it. Okay, we can stick with that.
I had a question
sorry.
on this note as well. What sort of policy is dictating HOA-owned trails or trails that are not owned and operated specifically by the town?
That's a good question. I mean, if they're, so you're talking about if they're HOA owned, so not necessarily public, but
Right, so,
only
well,
open to the HOA?
They would be public, but they're neighborhood they're classified as neighborhood trails unless I'm incorrect,
Probably
right?
more likely in the
Maintained by the
situation of a
town
metro
IGA.
district.
Hold on, I can't, what was that, Administrator?
Sorry, just, it's probably more likely a scenario when they were owned by a metro district, for instance. We have a lot of
Okay,
places in
so
town
another
that
good,
metro
yeah,
district
small
owns
government.
and
We don't have that
maintains
listed in
those
here?
trails, but they're open to the public.
No, it's not specifically listed, but certainly if there's language that you would want to address that, where it would not necessarily be a public trail or trailhead, but maybe, something else, public. I guess it would depend on if the HOA trailhead would be considered public or not, but we could certainly add some clarifying language in there.
Just as long as I don't mind, I don't necessarily wanna go into the weeds about it, but as long as the public trails may be located within, I don't know, it seems like this could be misconstrued on purpose for these kinds of entities where if they put a trail that they're required to put on the outskirts of their development, well, they're not owned and maintained by the town, they're self-owned and maintained, they might be able to get around this setback.
I see.
Is the word public general enough, or do we need to be specific?
Administrator Cook, can we allow private trails?
No,
I think we could just,
not an issue.
well, it's not that, well, I shouldn't answer that quickly. All the trails that we currently have in town are public, that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any private trails.
but that, not to say
It's
that,
not to say that our code prohibits them.
So it could be modified to basically just say something like public trails and trailheads open to the public and strike the part that's owned and maintained by the town.
I would like that better, I think.
okay? Park,
Attorneys,
park setbacks, that, I saw the, I thought that was in there, I guess not. That was your question, right?
Well, if we're gonna change anything, I think parks and trails, to me, it's all the same.
I agree.
And then to add to the comment about privately owned, I would just say common areas, that could be a retention pond, it could be a park, trail. So if we're going to label trails, I could see it on the edge of a community, it could be a large retention pond. Are we gonna include that as public spaces? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, like open space.
I would think it would, I don't know, but. I mean, I guess the public can access that.
That's my concern as well, right? Because especially with these large open spaces, if they're on the edges of some development, that might be 500, 600, 700 feet of just open space that now doesn't fall within the restrictions. That was kind of the impetus for
So
my
that basically, I'm just talking out loud here, would create setbacks from residential zones. Not necessarily a house.
Kinda like old development where they have the open space, 200-300 feet of open space on the outside, cause it's butting up next to like a wetland area or something like that.
Mhm.
Instead of being from the house, it's 500 feet in, that's gonna be from the property line of that development.
Do we have any suggestions maybe that Attorney Foot could look at?
So the wording
With
could
the
just be
360.
public open spaces, right? Not trails and parks, but any public open space, parks, trails.
Well, I mean, cause if sorry to interrupt, but if the issue is that we want to make sure that these things are away from publicly used space, especially with pocket parks and things like that, well, you can run in the open space just as well as you can be hanging out at a trailhead, right? That's why they're there, right?
And there's public trails up
So I like,
there.
May's,
Right.
whatever, that, what'd you
Public
say?
open space.
Well, and our code currently has a definition of public open space, right? Like you can't use a detention pond that has no public benefit as open space under our code for subdivision development, so I think there's some clarity there when we talk about what constitutes public open space. It's not just empty ground, but it's, land that's specifically identified in those development plans for the public's benefit and use. And again, I think our code is already pretty clear, at least currently, about what that means.
Okay, that sounds good.
So certainly I could go back and just make sure that we're, matching up the definitions there. If I'm hearing the concern correctly, there could be some common usage area that you'd be concerned there would be a new facility too close to that. Is that what I'm hearing? So in that case, I could certainly tighten it up by truing it with the definitions of open space that the town already has.
So like our little Thompson corridor where we've got open space on several hundred feet on either side of that corridor. we wouldn't want something too close to that.
Mhm.
So that's like an open space, even though there may not be a trail within 200 feet of the border of that, the boundary of that. We'd want to start from the boundary of the open space and go from there, right?
Sure. Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. That's just making sure the language is trued up.
Reciprocal setback of 1,000 feet for 1 year, then anywhere from 250 to 500 feet afterwards. So there's that range there. I'll just start out with a number. Would anyone like to go up from 250? I would like to go for 500, but if the majority,
For 500.
does anyone else feel the same way?
I vote 250.
Okay.
We're gonna take a straw poll.
I don't have a strong point once again until I think the health and safety issue until I see it. And especially if this is just sort of, once this is complete tabled, obviously I want more restrictive. So I would go for 500 if it was offered, but I don't have a feeling strongly.
Cause if we do the 500, we still have that variance clause in there.
Yeah, that's because the variance allows us some flexibility on this. Obviously, 500 feet around the whole pad is a lot. 250 is also a lot, but it's a little bit more palatable. But trying to find the balance on this, would a variance, which we have in here, allow us to kind of say it's 500, but it's open to variation according to whatever the board at the time is comfortable with risk-wise. So we could say 500, but with variances to be taken into consideration? Or is that too wordy or?
Well, I don't know what the specific wording would be, but yes, I mean, if you make it subject to the variance process, then you could come up and since this is new development close to existing wells, when you have a new development coming before you and asking for permission, and they say, well, we really need to have 350 feet instead of 500, then that could be part of the process
If
there.
we got rid of the variance thing at all, there's no variances allowed, then I'd be more apt to make sure our numbers are more accurate.
Mhm.
So I think with the variance in there, we can push our numbers up, be a little bit higher with exceptions, with the variance here and there upon special need.
Cause even that's when whoever's making this case to us, they have to come out and say, here's essentially what we found, here are our concerns, here's what we're doing to mitigate these risks, here is the footage that we have come up with that we consider reasonable, and we can look at that instead of, well, we're playing hypotheticals on hypotheticals.
Yeah.
So
Till it's in front of us.
with variances built into this where we can allow flexibility, I think that's, I mean,
Well, so some, I don't wanna confuse these things, some didn't wanna go above 250 period, it sounded like, but with the variance, is anyone interested in going above 250?
I think I appreciate the variance option, and so 500 I'd be open to. I think I wanna make sure that we have a very fair variance application process, especially for landowners, like that's their property. And I want them to be able, if they make a case that they want to have less,
Yeah.
less of that setback, then I think I wanna make sure that that's open to them and not too restrictive. But as far as the 500, I think, yeah, as long as we have that good process in place, I'm open to it.
Okay. Are you open, Nate? Cause you brought up your,
Well, that's what
okay,
I
so we got
just
three, is anyone else?
I would echo that.
Okay. Okay, that's good, well, 500 with the option with the variance, okay?
Mhm.
Next one is 250 feet from plugged, after plugged, abandoned and reclaimed. Do I have that right, 500? I don't know why I put 500 in there.
500 is during production, 250 after plugged and abandoned.
And that was just your suggestion, but you want some clarification?
Right, the 250 was the suggestion.
Does that work for everyone? Anyone? Any thoughts on that? Any differing thoughts on that? Okay.
seems reasonable, I mean, the
do that.
variance puts it 250 as kind of that low end cap to what you've seen, I think that's a reasonable boundary that should be respected for safety reasons alone.
And then we disclose that that's there, so if the builder wants to build further away, that's up to them, but we're at least saying more than 250.
Okay. Pipeline setback of 150 feet, I think that was trustee Sorcelli, was that your question? It works, I'll just give it works for me, anyone,
Well, I had a question on that but you said but you kinda answered my question, that's why I didn't ask it earlier. Because we don't have any scientific fact of how far can oil or gas leak through the soil before it finally wants to surface. I mean, it's kinda like, we gotta go look at every line issue that we've ever had, and well, that one was 75 feet, that one was 120, we haven't seen anything at 150 or more, so 150 is a good number. It's kinda-
I don't think I
There's been no
could,
science that says, oh yeah, we had a pipeline, we put it under pressure, and we also had one no pressure, and this is where we detected the gas leak out this far, so that's as far as we know it goes.
I'm not aware of anything that would go into that grade of detail.
Anyone like to see anything different than 150? Okay, we'll go with that. Should we add informed consent?
Yeah.
I'd like to. Anyone
No.
not? Okay. Yes? That's it. That's all the questions I have down. Did you need anything, any other ones that I didn't get listed?
I think that covered everything.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, 'cause those last two are basically putting on the developer, not the oil and gas rate.
Yeah.
Okay, trustees, anything else? Like to bring up, trustee Murphy?
Just like to say, I really like the first process of tranche one. Kind of emailing off kind of our general idea to get some coherent thoughts behind these numbers rather than discussing this,
Right.
for hours on end. So I think that certainly would be helpful for the next two tranches. But yeah, I really appreciate the discussion and the questions raised by all the board members and all of your work, so.
Great, thank you. If you all have other comments about, how to maybe go about tranche two differently than tranche one, of course, happy to hear them. But yes.
I saw Will writing his notes down over here and I can't read his handwriting.
Yeah, right.
So if you made a slide at the end of your presentation with those questions, so so I don't have to read my handwriting or his, that would be helpful for me.
Oh, the questions that we need your answers
I
on.
think he wants it more legibly written out on a PowerPoint.
Right, understood, okay. That makes sense. Well, and so what we would do, then for the next session for tranche two would be, I think the next one would just be a general introduction of this is the scope of what you're looking at. And then, kind of get more specific as time goes on and maybe the same kind of process as here, but it's gonna be a little more extensive because the public health, safety, welfare, and environment type of protections are pretty extensive, so. But
Well, thank you, and I just want to say, the commenter that spoke, we are not Loveland, and I think a lot of that is because we have you, and you're doing a great job being very thorough with this. And I think if I was outside of Berthoud and looking in, I think we're looked at very fairly because of you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, I appreciate it.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Back to order, and we have Kelly Lidbetter here, and to present on our transit assessment. And I think, there'll be a motion at the end to approve this or not. All right. Welcome and thank you for coming down.
Yeah, good to see you all. Thanks for having me. Yes, my name is Kelly Ledbetter. I work as a transportation planner for a company called Felsberg Holt Nolevig. So we've had the opportunity to work alongside town staff in exploring just what the future of transit could look like in town. And so we're gonna focus tonight on really the assessment's findings, the assessment's recommendations, and then kind of outline what the recommended next steps will be, including some of the decisions from you all, from town staff and things like that that need to be considered. So I'll start by providing just some context of kind of where we've been, what we learned, and then kind of why we're arriving at the recommendations that we are, and kind of what we completed, leading up to the process, because I think some of you may be brand new to kind of this assessment. So yes, so just to kind of loop you all into that. So yes, like I said, we'll focus though on the recommendations and the funding opportunities, and then discuss the implementation and the next steps. If at any point you have questions, feel free to jump in. I know we're gonna go through this first part very quickly. So if you'd like something clarified, just let me know. Okay, so previous efforts, we started by reviewing what was in place to date, so the existing services. This included BATS and RAFT, both of which serve the town, and also some of the regional efforts that had been ongoing. So like what's out at I-25, what's going on in US 287. We completed a demographics and travel trends assessment. This was really just our opportunity to understand, how generally does Berthoud travel? Those taking transit, but also those who are driving and walking and biking, and is there a potential there for some change in that regard? And then we also completed community and stakeholder engagement. This involved meeting with community in person. There were online engagement opportunities. I think what we learned most from the community engagement was that the community members were generally not familiar. A lot of them had never taken BATS before, had never taken RAFT. We learned that the vast majority of respondents, though, would be open to using transit, and we're excited to learn more about that. I would say too, when we conducted a survey, community members were most concerned with the destinations and kind of the regions that transit would service, and less about kind of the service type and the different parameters, just like, tell me where it goes, tell me, how I can take it. And we also closely coordinated with RAFT, I would say, as the most meaningful stakeholder, since a notable portion of the transit trips that are being completed in town to date are actually provided by RAFT. We also conducted an operational finance and governance assessment, which is essentially just a fancy way for saying we did a deep dive into looking at how things currently operate, how that's currently financed, and then how decisions are made, because that could have implications on the alternatives being considered for the future. I think lessons learned there is that the vast majority of the BATS trips are in town and also to Loveland, while the vast majority of the RAFT trips are taken from somewhere within the fire protection district, which is like the service area that RAFT services, to Longmont. So there's pretty distinct trip patterns there. It's certainly a unique time to be conducting an assessment like this, just given the pandemic. I will say, though, that kind of at the year-end data that we have now for 2022 does indicate that the services are starting to return to the pre-pandemic ridership levels. Not quite there, but certainly after that dip seen in 2020 and even in 2021, there is an uptick there that is notable. So the draft report that you received did not include that 2022 ridership information, but we just are receiving it and it will be included in the final. So with all of that information, both the demographics, the travel trend information, input, just the qualitative input from stakeholders, we arrived at just kind of an overall guiding vision. This was something that we kind of used as a North Star through the process. I'll just highlight that it focuses on a couple key attributes of the service, wanting the desired service in the future to be accessible and to be efficient, and that it provides the opportunity to access both local and regional destinations, including those regional transit services that are kind of emerging in the community and coming online in the near term and potentially in the long term. And when we distilled it all down, we really identified kind of the four needs and opportunities. So paramount is that we continue to serve those existing riders and those in the community that are transit dependent, so those that can only meet their daily needs by using transit. So that is paramount. Supporting the town's vision for the future, paramount. And then the opportunity to enhance and expand local service, were something that kind of is a key kind of defining thing for this assessment. And then looking for ways to take advantage of the opportunity to provide regional connections. Lastly, through this framework, I'll just note that we identified early upfront 7 characteristics that we thought would be really important as we started to evaluate possible service scenarios. So I won't read these all to you, but and you'll see kind of how this shakes out in the evaluation. But these were the 7 that we considered. And again, kind of just provided some framework and some direction for our decision making, given that this is qualitative, has some quantitative inputs and things, but these were what were guiding us. So we started kind of with two levels of screening. I'll say we cast a really wide net to start to say, hey, of all the possible ways that transit serves a community, which would have initial, applicability. Those that are in the light blue were not retained for further consideration. And those were, kind of, I don't want to say eliminated, but put aside strictly based on the size of the town, the number of population both now and anticipated in this kind of near-term timeframe that we were looking at, which is 10 years, the needs and opportunities, and then just generally how cost prohibitive things are of some of these on the list. Certainly at a regional level, some of these may be considered, but that's not something that the town would take on in and of themselves. But with that, 3 stood out as possible models for further consideration. The point-to-point on-demand service. So it's generally what you're operating today. You take someone from point A to point B, but there's a lot of opportunity within how things currently operate to make that more efficient, make that more accessible, make that more reliable. So really this service model focused on, hey, how could we do that? The second of which was the microtransit, and we'll talk about what microtransit is. And then the last of which was really putting a greater emphasis on connecting the commuter services to and from the regional mobility hub out at I-25, potentially along US 287 in the future, and really shifting, emphasis to those commuter travel patterns that we know are really happening on a daily basis and was a big consideration for the public to evaluate. I'll just note that with these service models, again, these are service models specifically for consideration for BATS, and all of these assumed that BATS would continue to operate. Demand for RAFT. Demand for RAFT service may shift with the implementation of a change for BATS, but all of these scenarios assumed that RAFT would still have, really important kind of role in their meeting the needs of community members. And so that's kind of a baseline kind of built into all of this. So in summary, I'll just say right off the top that microtransit is that recommended service model based on its ability to meet the town's current needs and also just really take advantage of these future opportunities. And it's fair to say, well, what is microtransit? Like, I don't even know what that means, and that's fair. It's definitely kind of a jargon term in our industry, and so I want to go kind of over what microtransit is. It's essentially marrying transit service provision with technology. So it's tech-enabled transportation that takes all of these trip requests in real time and routes that within a defined service area. It's using a lot of big data built into these algorithms to most efficiently route and kind of group passengers as needed into shared rides. So it's a similar technology that Uber and Lyft use, but at that public scale rather than that private individual platform. But there's certainly probably an experience that you've had, where you're looking to book a trip and it asks your willingness, for that to be matched with someone else, or if you want that strictly private. So it's a similar technology in that. I will say it is a service model that 10 years ago didn't exist. 6 years ago was bleeding edge, you really had to have a strong service in place to start to modify that, but has really over the last 5 years really developed, really matured into a viable service option, and not just viable, a service option and a service model that many communities are starting to consider for either a portion or all of their community. Typically the benefit with microtransit is that the fleets are the vehicles in the fleets are a lot smaller. So this isn't going to be a 40-passenger van. This is going to be a 6 to 8 person vehicle or even a single vehicle. And the real benefit of that is then you have a lot of route patterns that can be currently met rather than a strictly defined fixed route system. And I'll just say that we learned a lot of this, I'm gonna say this is a learning experience, I'd say for town staff, about what the possibilities would be. We met with 3 service providers who currently operate microtransit in the state, just to ask them questions, get their, perspectives on, hey, here's our current kind of conditions, here's what we've learned today, what do you think? And have those conversations. And learned, and really understood that this is offered in 2 ways. Either you just contract and buy the software, so software as a service, or you operate that under a turnkey contract. So with the software as a service, this looks like contracting with one of the providers for their big data and their technology and their algorithms and the softwares only. We would estimate that this would cost about $250,000 a year. I'll note that builds in the existing kind of average for batch of $175,000 annually that's already, being spent to offer that service. So it would be an additional roughly $75,000 for that software subscription. And that may vary year over year because this is for the software component, but there's no hardware components in this type of arrangement. So any capital costs that would need to be incurred, like replacing a vehicle or things like that, would still be kind of the town's responsibility. I think the benefit, or one of the main considerations is the amount of responsibility then and the amount of control that the town still retains in this type of environment. I mean, certainly it would keep a lot of the operations in-house, but the town would really gain that power of the technology, resulting in things being more efficient, more reliable. And that would be kind of the internal considerations. Externally, the software would certainly change the user experience. So instead of calling with 24 hours in advance or more, which is the current system for booking a trip, you could book a trip not only the day of, but likely within 30 minutes in advance. And again, the parameters differ on how you build that. But from a user perspective, I think it would be much more intuitive and much more immediate to be able to do that. I will say that under this condition, we learned, this kind of contracting mechanism, the town would still be responsible for all of the engagement and marketing. And I want to note that because based on what we heard from the community outreach, certainly there's more opportunity to promote and advertise and really let people know about the asset that the BAT service is. And so marketing and that additional outreach would really be kind of paramount to supporting this new, this implementation of the software. So the second option, I would say, contracting option, is for the turnkey scenario. I would say that in total would cost about $1.2 million a year. Certainly that's a higher ongoing cost, but that anticipates that there would be no or low, very low vehicle capital costs because built into that arrangement, the contractor then would provide the vehicles. So leasing vehicles then, which again, kind of relinquishes control, relinquishes some responsibility from the town, but comes with some guarantees that the vehicles then, are not offline, pulling from a larger fleet of vehicles and things would be able to backfill. And I just want to put that cost into perspective. So that's about the same cost as building 1 mile of road, or about the same cost as building about a mile of trails, I guess, depending on the complexity of the trail and kind of what you're doing, but I know it feels like a big price tag, certainly when you look at that compared to the software only, but I do want to put that in perspective as it relates to other transportation investments. So under this type of arrangement, the contractor takes, nearly all of the responsibility, and for the reporting as well, which again, there's a benefit to that, because they then are continuing to monitor and to analyze data, not just from the town services, but from services all across the country. In some cases, the providers that we talk to operate globally, so they have an arsenal of information that they can really then recommend changes on the fly. Something simple as, hey, we think there might be some latent demand, you might wanna consider extending your Saturday service. Or hey, we're not really seeing an uptick in this type of pattern, what if we considered this type of change and monitored? So the ability to make modifications and really optimize the service, I think, is one of the key advantages among some under that contracting. So I'll just note, there's no new funding set aside. There has not been any decisions on how to go about implementing the service in town, but certainly that would be the recommendation and kind of the overall finding from the assessment as we completed it to date. But if the town decides to move forward, I will encourage you that there are a lot of funding opportunities, some of which are newer because of changes at the federal level that would be opportunities to consider, both through the Federal Transit Administration for their formula funding or many of their competitive grant programs, which have been bolstered through the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Federal Highway Administration. So FHWA has a handful of grant programs specifically focused on emerging technologies. And I think in your case, you would have a benefit actually of being considered a rural community versus an urban. A lot of those grants then ask for the type of location. And so I think there's increasingly some competitive opportunities in that way. And then congressionally directed spending, or earmarks, but now known as congressionally directed spending. I will say that transit agencies across the state have been successful the last 2 years in their requests for funding in that way. Any state funding, would be in coordination with CDOT. They are the Division of Transit and Rail would oversee that in coordination with the North Front Range MPO. And so certainly coordinating with them. And then from a local funding standpoint, certainly a lot of the funding for BATS currently comes from the 1998 sales tax. And so just an evaluation of what those competing transportation kind of needs and priorities are, and if there's any willingness to reallocate some of that funding then to offset some of these costs. I will note too, oftentimes when we talk about funding changes in transit service, people say, well, what if we increase the fares, or what if we made a change to the fare structure? But I will say that the amount recouped, so fare box recovery, from the current system really is only about 2 to 3% of total revenue. So it's not really a consideration. In fact, the changes that we've seen for other agencies in August, when fares are free, actually results in a greater ridership when fares are, just outright free. And from a financial standpoint, the gain then for that 2 to 3% is pretty minor. So just something to consider. That fare box recovery percentage is not unique, or low for the community here in any way. It's just to say that that's not a viable way to, transit doesn't pay for itself, roads don't pay for themselves. So, just something else to consider when we think about the funding opportunities. So in terms of next steps, we feel like there's kind of 6 main things for the town to consider. From a microtransit perspective, it would be just confirming the type of service delivery model that feels better suited for the town. That'll clarify what the funding needs are and who the future responsibility really lies on. Additionally, conduct additional research on what the funding opportunities may be. This is kind of a high level. All of those grants that we mentioned have different application periods, so identifying which ones are coming up in the spring, which ones are coming up in the summer, would be a great next step. And I'd also say to meet, with CDOT and the North Front Range MPO as a part of that process. They often have a really good pulse on what opportunities would exist if there's any additional formula funds or discretionary funds available. And then, kind of next in that would be securing funding. funding could be secured kind of as a temporary or like a pilot program. So, you know, you as a community say, hey, we're willing to make this commitment for a year, or we're willing to make this financial commitment for 2 years to see how this changes our community. Or, you know, securing funding under a grant, same thing, would likely be for a certain period of time to cover the operational expenses there. And then determining who that service provider would be. You know, you could either just sole source that contract to one of the providers. There are oodles out there in the industry. There are many that operate in the state, certainly some that already operate in the state. There's advantages working with someone who's already somewhat local. Or, you know, issuing an RFP and requesting proposals. And then at that point, you know, that would be the point then when you would obviously understand what type of contract you would be going through, and then that would give you the opportunity to kind of finalize the service, whether it's the parameters of the different software and the onboarding and the training that would be involved for drivers and staff here to launch that, or a more robust kind of finalization of the service and the marketing, you know, the promotional activities and things like that. But yeah, finalizing that service design and all of those algorithm parameters that you would build in. And that would all kind of lead to launching the service. So yeah, the timing and kind of implementation of these next steps really largely depends on funding availability and the desired kind of means to secure that funding. I think in our kind of high level estimate, if you were, you know, to entirely fund this transition to microtransit service through a turnkey contract, that could be as soon as 6 months, based on conversations that we had with providers. But any of those additional steps that would need to be taken would add time and you know, would, add time to the process. So there's where we've landed. Yes,
Okay,
Trustee
thank you very
Hardy.
much. Just a little clarification on the software as a service, that was $250,000 a year, right? And you're making a BATS reference at 70,000, so you were saying there's 100,000 difference between the two, or?
So there's approximately a $75,000 price tag for that software for the software only.
75,000.
And that's if we
So
continue to.
250 was a total number of what
That's
we-
total.
I got
Yep.
you, okay.
Yes.
And that's if we continue to operate with 1.5 drivers
Okay.
in the existing vehicles that we have, right? That doesn't include other costs to expand the service.
And, okay, but the turnkey contract would expand the service, or that's also 1.5 drivers of
No, the
their drivers?
the turnkey contract that we're suggesting, at least in terms of the amount of money that we might be obligated to spend if we went down that road, would be a significant expansion of the service.
Yeah, okay,
Well,
well,
beyond
I guess I'm getting at something is with the software as a service, why didn't we incorporate that at the same expansion of service?
Partly because I think it's a little less defined, so it's easy for us to reach out and say, if we want a turnkey scenario from a consultant, or not a consultant, a contractor, and we wanna operate these hours, these days of the week, we wanna go within this service territory, they can tell us how much they're gonna charge us for that, right? And so it's relatively simple for us to define that cost.
Because we didn't know, okay.
Yeah, and so I guess we could have done the same. We could put together our own business plan, our own business model to expand the service ourselves for the same cost, or for the, you know, to the same level of service, the same number of drivers, the same number of vehicles. It would be significantly more expensive.
Okay, I was just wanted to clarify. Great, I think, Trustee Butler, I think we started with Trustee Ayers last time. Do you have any questions? I guess we can do questions and comments. I don't know why I'm doing, it's not a public hearing, so go for both.
I admittedly am not as familiar with
Yeah.
our current raft and bats. Conceptually, this sounds good, but I do have sticker shock with looking at the full turnkey option
Absolutely.
and wondering if that's really the best use of our, budget. I'd see the value in it, I mean, there's no doubt, but that's just to be candid, kind of
Yeah.
where I'm at. But I'm not the most educated person up here on this topic at all.
On that, you reached out to Raft and they were receptive. Is that to the SA, which one?
Yeah, so I'll in either condition, I think for Raft, what we've discussed a lot with them, and I think we're all on the same page, is that Raft is much more of a kind of a human services transportation provider, right? Seniors and adults with disabilities is their only real, those are the only folks they serve, right? They're not gonna pick up a kid that's going to the rec center, right? But they can't drive, or they're not gonna take me to work, right? That's a different kind of service, and we think that they fill a really important niche. And one of the real benefits of that is that they do that primarily with volunteers, and so they're able to keep expenses very low relative to what we have to pay in order to provide those kinds of trips. So our suggestion would be that regardless of where we go, we already do this already anyway, we're already supporting Raft because they provide service in town for those types of trips, right? You guys budget annually to contribute to their operations so that they can supplement our service. We would expect to continue that. So I think from their perspective, it's kind of irrelevant, because what we're talking about right now, we run a very similar service. Now we're available to many more people, but the vast majority of our riders, which is a very small number, fall in the same categories as the folks that take Raft. And so we're providing duplicate service. And so what our suggestion, I think, is, one, it doesn't make sense. I think we eliminated the possibility of running a fixed route service in Berthoud, right? Fixed route being there's a bus route, it has stops along the way, and it goes to very specific destinations. It's not financially feasible for us to do that. It just doesn't make sense. But what we do want to do is create opportunities to connect to other services in our region, like busting and flex, and to provide those, I'll call it last mile connections, right? We're not ever going to drive people to Fort Collins, nor should we. But if we can get them to a bus that takes them to Fort Collins, then that eliminates that problem of like, hey, I don't wanna go 2 miles from my house to the bus stop to go to Fort Collins, right? Now we can create maybe that last mile scenario. It doesn't make sense to do that with 12 passenger buses either. They're expensive to operate, and they're very expensive to replace and maintain. And so this microtransit option gives us the ability to do that. And I think to expand service in a really significant way. Because to be frank, what we do right now is horribly inefficient from a cost standpoint. I mean, like $600 a person per month. I mean, that's kind of what we're spending.
So to get to you're saying Raft is on board with either way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, I think they see the value of a microtransit scenario. They wanna continue to provide service to that niche, and we think it makes sense for them to continue to do that. It's not that we wouldn't still have overlap. If you're a senior or an adult with disability, you could still take our service as well. But their service would be, could potentially be done a different way, right? They might take you a farther distance. They might be willing to come and pick you up and help you, what we call door through door, right? Rather than like, we expect you to be able to get to the curb and get in the vehicle. So they can provide the service in a different way that maybe doesn't make sense for us,
Okay.
for that specific demographic.
And I think with that complementary relationship with those services, it frees up BATS to offer services that may not be offered right now in the sense of the types of users. So when we think about, the types of trips that could be taken, I think it frees up this potential for BATS to take on a different services.
And I will
Different
say
trip
too, I
types
think, from my perspective, the board would have to make an intentional choice to expand our service. If we continue to operate what we have today, even with the software as a service, which is relatively low cost in the grand scheme of things, what we'd be using that for is to try to make our service more efficient and then hopefully increase ridership. But we're still gonna be driving most of the time 1 or 2 people around in a 10 or 12 passenger bus.
If we don't, this isn't including advertising, right? Because that's one of the big problems is people don't even know BATS exists.
Correct. There is some of that, right? Like, it does not include expanding our advertising. It doesn't, we would do all of those things, right? So I guess my suggestion is that even if we do software as a service, it's not going to, there's going to be additional expenses beyond. what that number looks like. And what we'd be doing is trying to make our service more cost efficient by getting more people on the bus at a time. And allowing people to schedule in shorter windows rather than like 24 hours in advance like we do now, right? So we'd make it more efficient for the rider, and hopefully more user friendly with the software as a service. And by doing so, then hopefully we increase ridership, would in theory would bring the cost per rider down. We're gonna increase costs as well, right? So you have to increase ridership pretty significantly for it to be kind of a net positive, but again, our cost per trip right now is substantial.
Okay.
And I say this kind of half jokingly, but like we could almost buy every one of our BATS riders their own car and save money.
Trustee Butler, I kinda interrupted you, I just wanted to.
No, this is
clarify
actually
that.
great, this is very
Okay.
relevant, feedback, so thanks for.
Trustee Sorcelli? Any questions, comments?
I think just based on the information, where do you see us falling? I mean, all of this content is so helpful, like thank you so much for the in-depth dive to know where we fall. But just based on where we're at and what we're offering with BATS, do you see the demand for expanded services, or do you think we're meeting the need with what we're providing?
It's an interesting question, cause we're meeting the needs of the folks that ride today. I don't know that we have a real clear handle on what's the existing need that's not using the service, right? I think there's a lot of folks. One, the requirement to schedule 24 hours in advance is really challenging. And when we only have 1.5 drivers, if one of them is sick, the service is done for the day, right? I mean, it's just it's a really impractical. It's a problem with running something so small, right, and not having additional resources to kind of move around. If we expanded our current service, more drivers, more vehicles, different types of vehicles, software as a service, I would expect ridership to increase, right? Heavier marketing. There's a lot of folks who, no matter how we market, aren't gonna ride the service because they're not gonna wait. They're not gonna schedule 24 hours in advance. It's just not practical for a lot of folks. And a lot of times, like when you need a ride, you need it right then, right? Like not like, and so, you know, I guess I lost my train of thought a little bit, but I think from my perspective anyway, after we've evaluated this, if we want to expand the service significantly, my suggestion would be that we try to make an investment for a few years and see how it goes. We treat it like a pilot program. We would expand the service dramatically, it would expand our costs for a few years, we know that going up front, and make that commitment. We may even wanna choose to provide all of those rides for free in the beginning, like for the first year, just so that people, it's a great way to raise awareness of the service and get people to ride it, see how it works and see how functional it can be. If we want to expand our service, we can make some modest improvements to what we do now. I wouldn't expect them to be significant without a fairly significant change in our operation.
So
Yeah, I think based on, you know, looking at the data, it's difficult to predict what kind of that latent demand might be. But I will say based on peer cities, certainly for all of the agencies or the contractors that we met with, the agencies that they are providing current service for, it varies, but it's a significant increase in ridership. And I think, you know, there's the increasing arsenal of data that they can look to pull peer cities to say, hey, of a community of this size or a community kind of growing at this rate of this type of land uses, here's kind of what we would expect, and really help you monitor what could be expected for ridership. And if you're exceeding that, great, let's figure out why, you know, was there something that we did from a communication standpoint? Or if we're not meeting that, is it because the service parameters might not be completely suited and, you know, and have the expertise to help you guide those changes to get to that anticipated ridership level, so.
Thank you. Could you see this being an on-demand service, like an Uber type of situation?
That's what this microtransit, like a turnkey microtransit service would be an Uber service for all intents. I mean, if it helps you kind of think about it that way, I mean, I always just describe it as a publicly funded Uber service. because
It's
that's,
managed by
because
an
that's the easiest way to wrap your hand around it. Yeah, it's managed by an app. There would be other avenues to schedule rides if like an app just doesn't work for you, or that's an opportunity, that's a possibility, but
But they're not contractors and they have the equipment, just in case there's someone handicapped, they have a ramp and all that.
absolutely,
Yeah,
we would
it's ADA
expect
accessible.
full ADA accessibility.
And that they'll show up because they're,
Yeah.
okay.
And
Not
they're getting,
Uber.
the company's getting paid to provide
Right.
vehicles, drivers, manage the system, provide reporting. That's part of that turnkey service. It's basically building a department that we don't have today. But allowing contractors that specialize in this, have some kind of expertise, do it all over the country and in some cases all over the world, to provide that service on our behalf.
Federal grants.
Questions, comments?
And just comment wise, I think this is it's interesting to look at because I think that this could be a service that could be helpful for a lot of people if it's expanded, like as is right now, a lot of people may not utilize it, but if it's marketed and expanded, I could see a lot of people using this as an alternative to what they're doing right now. But I don't think it's for right now. I could see us saying, hey, in 24, 25, the town intends to launch this pilot program and here's the benefits of it. Would you be interested in just kind of having a survey out to the public to see how those different dynamics might benefit somebody or not benefit them? I don't know. That's kind of where I'm falling right now.
I do think I appreciate your perspective. I think there's a lot of sense to that. And I think what our next steps, if you say, hey, well, one, we just want you to approve the assessment document itself, right? Like we've done this work, we wanted you to see it, wanted you to say, yes, we agree with kind of the conclusions here. That's not committing us to microtransit service. The next steps for us would then be to go and put those business plans in place and to go find funding that might be available. If we're able to get a federal earmark, for instance, for a pilot program, which I think might be really competitive personally, to be able to say, hey, we wanna do a pilot program for microtransit at a rural location, to demonstrate its effectiveness, even, cause a lot of these services, really most of them are in medium and large sized cities, right? So this could be a cool pilot program. If we had that opportunity, we would obviously come back to you and say, hey, we wanna make this thing happen now. But I think there's still a wide variety of possibilities here. But I think for us, I think there's value in understanding, does the board want to pursue expanding this service in a dramatic fashion? Is it worth investment in terms of time and money to better understand these possible scenarios and go down that road, or should we just continue forward with what we have now and do our best to make it more efficient as we can?
Well, just one last comment, I'm sorry,
Yeah, no,
I'm not trying to
Don't
bogart,
apologize.
just I appreciate that idea, and I think that I feel like that's something that I definitely would agree with, that just at least trying to see if we could approach it that way and see if we could get grant funding, and if we can launch a pilot and test it out, that'd be an amazing opportunity. In the meantime, when we talk about efficiency, I would like to see if there's something we could do about our current efficiency issues and the cost effectiveness of the current program. Because I think, when you talk about how much it's costing per passenger, that seems like a huge leak of funds that we can tighten up somehow. Maybe with some sort of modification that I don't know, I'm not gonna be able to figure that out tonight, but that does stick out to me as something that maybe we could work on now and try to tighten up that efficiency.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Trustee Murphy?
I would agree with all those comments, and I mean, just looking at the assessment, I think microtransit seems to make sense for kind of at least the near term. And a software model, I think, would allow us probably a lot more control and flexibility to kind of dip our toes into the water and see if this is an effective way to look at things. My biggest concern is the application and the accessibility of it for the users, whether they're seniors or disabled, I think that user experience is really important to hammer out before we really dial anything up. So we need to make sure that's working for everyone. That's all I've got to say, I guess, yeah.
There's a call-in option, right? For people that don't have phones?
There could be, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
I thought that was-
they retain a call-in option, retain like an online, I believe, option as well, like some sort of website-based
Website,
platform. And then also the app-based that could be used.
My comments would be, from a ADA standpoint, maybe more so text sizing, contrast on the website, stuff like that, small things.
Sure, yeah, like the 508 compliance, that it's like, that's it, yeah.
Questions, comments?
Oh, my turn?
Yep.
Is there like a scalability, like on a scale of 1 to 10, are we sitting currently with bats at like a 2? And if we did the turnkey, would it take us to a 10? Or could we say, give us a 4 or 5 right now, and then we can take it up? Because it seems like we're making a big jump from barely funding something to like really funding something.
There is scalability. In the turnkey scenario, you can kind of define whatever parameters you want, right? As we've met with a couple of different providers to kind of better understand their services and how they operate, we can define how we want to run.
So we can say we have 1.5 drivers now, we wanna start with 4 from your service.
Yeah, I mean, we have the ability to kind of define all those. Some of that gets, obviously there's some predictive work that they do based on all of their experience, right? They've got just enormous amounts of data from all over the country and all over the world. Several of these providers do, right? So they can come in and say, based on your type of town and the kind of service you're looking to operate, we think we need this many vehicles and this many drivers, and we're gonna operate in these hours because that's what's worked elsewhere. And so they can kind of help define that service, but then because we're constantly gathering data through the service, it can be adjusted really quickly as needed, right? So if there's a big demand on Tuesdays at 4:00, we don't even need to know why, we just know that we have 10 times the number of riders, we can make those adjustments relatively quickly. I think that kind of turnkey scenario gives us the flexibility to do that in a way even that's challenging for us to do if they're all town employees, for instance, right?
Cause I view this as kinda like our contract with the sheriff's department. And we pay for a service, and then if we need someone called out sick, no worries, we'll just send down somebody else from Loveland who's, not scheduled that day, or we've always got Phil, because we're pulling from this turnkey situation that can supply us with vehicles and people. So
That's kind of the hope and expectation is that
So if we did the turnkey situation, would that take away funding or add funding or abilities to raft?
no, I think you would make that decision knowing that we're gonna continue to support Raft financially.
So we wouldn't
And
affect
we'd have to
them.
bake that into the whole,
Okay.
yeah.
Have we seen the software and how it works? It's like,
Mhm.
I've seen GoGo Granny, I've seen services for like teenagers where I could call in for a subscription and say, hey, pick up my mom on Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays. I get a text saying they were picked up, I get a text that they were dropped off, I get a text that they were picked back up, and then text that they were dropped back off at home. I'm in the loop because being a caretaker for somebody or my kids or whatever. So does that be part of this software that we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it seems particularly customizable. I think it depends on, which provider you go with, but man, with the apps that we downloaded and the parameters that we were able to quickly input, it seems like it's
So it's pretty
fully capable
Covering all the
of-
bases.
Yep.
They've got it all figured out.
Yeah, we specifically were asking in some of our discussions, just about children, certainly recognizing that there's, I think, 23% of your community are under the age of 18, so you have to be 14 to take advantage of this service. That's state law, so you couldn't, an elementary school student could not take this by themselves. But for middle schoolers and kind of that in between age, they would be able to do so, and there were parameters built in on being able to track the rides and the progression, and then when it ends, you know, the latitude, longitude of the pickup, the latitude, longitude of the drop off, the time of that, and then it keeps a log of all of the trips that you've taken, and so.
And then we could sell like per fee trips or a subscription service and things like that.
You can do all of the above, it's kind of eminently
The fare
flexible.
structure, and you know, when you were asking earlier, I mean, the kind of turnkey certainly built in some assumptions. So that assumed that there were 5 vehicles that you could book within a half hour, right? So we gave them a handful of parameters just to say, hey, if this really goes from day before, have to call, to I can get a trip within 30 minutes, what, you know, and the reason they can guarantee that is because of the number of vehicles, the extent of the service area. So again, changing your service area has a big impact, could have a big impact, right? Because then it changes the overall trip distance and the trip duration. And so there were, you know, I'd say not quite a few, but we had to make some assumptions when we talked about the turnkey.
And is this something that, could we partner, like we did with our high-speed internet, partner with like Johnstown and say, hey, if we need this as our service area, could we split the cost between another municipality and get almost the same service for half the price? Or however many ways we split it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't
My
particularly
suspicion is that,
look into that.
yeah, I don't know that we looked at kind of partnering with an adjacent municipality. My
I think it's a
guess-
great idea, cause
Yeah.
really specifically brought up microtransit and that their bus system was a get is dead, and so I think there might be some interest in that.
Yeah, I think
Just
so.
like-
I mean, I think if we can put together a little coalition of adjacent municipalities, maybe there's an opportunity.
Cause like if I could take like a mini microbus over to Johnstown, that gets me one step closer to Centera through that system, through a shared system, this sort of thing, so. Cause it's a, you know, right now, the quickest service to get a ride home from like Casina Cantina is to call Will and
Not right. I'll get you the margaritas too.
have food delivered to my house and then just get a ride home with him with my dinner, so.
With my sweet app
Yeah, so but
that's broken right now.
And again, I think, you know, what we're not asking for tonight is a commitment to microtransit or a commitment to software as a service or turnkey. But what we are suggesting is that we believe microtransit is the right model for us. And now we need to go and study and kind of consider, you know, what's the best, most efficient method for delivering that.
I like the scalability fact of it, that, you know, hey, you know, we're gonna create this size service area. This is what our current ridership is that we have known today, because we have the FAFSA for it. But then potentially, we're gonna scale up that ridership because now we're gonna have a company that's got more than 1.5 drivers, they've got reliable vehicles, they've got a software application that mom could use, teenager could use, I could use, either through email, app, or telephone. It's gonna be probably more reliable than what we've got, for sure. But yeah, if we can just say, yeah, we don't need this system because that's for a town that's closer to Boulder or Denver, we're rural, so can we do a little piece and give it a little try, do a trial? And then scale it up from there as we need to and have that ability, so. And then I'd love to be able to like talk to Johnstown or Milliken or Loveland to see if, you know, cause I know there was like a time they tried to get a bus route between Loveland and Greeley, and that didn't do so well, but they were using big like 24 passenger buses and.
Stay tuned, I think that's coming.
Yeah, well, I would certainly think Loveland would be a key partner, and I say that just given your current travel patterns. So if you wanna look at what does the existing data tell us? Not the potential rides, but the existing rides, there's significant influx into Loveland on a daily basis. I think for those using the BATS, just to go to Walmart and to go to, you know, grocery and appointments and things like that is much more Loveland oriented. In part maybe because it can be, right, with BATS, and so that's how people meet their daily needs, but I think even under, you know, a wider service area, I think there still would be that gravitational pull to Loveland for those services.
I will say, you know, you think about not just trips to Loveland, but trips from Loveland. You know, one of the things we hear a lot from local businesses, particularly manufacturing businesses that require some skilled labor, is it's really hard to find people. And it's especially hard to recruit people. Because even though they're well-paying jobs, it's still very expensive to live here. And if you live in, you know, Fort Collins and you're qualified, even making $30 an hour, you might not wanna drive down here every day.
Yeah, I mean,
But
the
you-
number,
but you might not be able to afford to move either, and so, but, you know, if you can take a bus from Fort Collins and then a microtransit service can pick you up at the bus stop and take you the mile over to the business where you're gonna work, rather than have to walk or ride a bike, suddenly that becomes a much more feasible scenario for folks, right? So I mean, I think it has some even kind of unseen economic impact that, you know, once the service gets well developed, it might have that opportunity.
it's a number of posts I see on Facebook about, hey, my car didn't start this morning, anybody going a long mile, wanna hitch a ride?
Yeah, all of a sudden now we have the opportunity to help solve some of those problems, but I would say, I think what we would do is try to define the scope of the service that we want. We'd solicit proposals from, you know, a handful of providers for turnkey service that we could then evaluate against us doing it ourselves, even with the software as a service. And what would it take for us to expand that and operate it internally at the same level, and then we can bring that back to you with hopefully some funding options, kind of all in parallel. We can be working towards all those things at one time.
As long as we don't hurt raft and
Okay.
improve
Well, sounds like you're
raft
supportive,
and do that
Trustee Hardy?
overall. Yeah, as long as, I just don't want it to be detrimental to raft,
Right.
I think that's a great program, and if anything, I'd like to hope that it would help raft, either through fees that we charge through the services that we could have go contribute to their program, or
Cool.
how all that works.
Trustee Ayers?
Yep, I'm supportive, obviously, and taking in all of the comments that everyone's made. I think that the convenience factor of expanding any kind of service is a more than necessary step for any kind of transit system, right? Getting that last mile in to have people get to some sort of transit. And also, it's the convenience, right? Having to book a trip 24 hours in advance is not conducive to getting people to do it. Because you can just call up your friend and maybe it takes 2 hours for them to get here, that's still much more convenient. And I think that convenience gets people to understand that it is maybe just for short trips, or it is just for commute or for running errands, and being able to book those trips with this service that would kind of take you like a bus, but I guess more personalized. I think that's incredibly important to increase those numbers. And once the numbers increase, I think that the secondary aspect of that is that the culture will then make it more visible, more acceptable, and that in and itself will increase the ridership, which it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point, where the more people you can get on by making it convenient, the more people will want to take it, the more people that will take it, therefore the more people will take it.
Very profound.
Right. A question I have for you to change tracks a little bit. In the packet that you gave us, the graph that split up the different costs for housing, transportation, and combined, did you put in that 24% that was spent on transportation per year, did you put in car payments at all, or is that just gas upkeep of transportation?
So that comes from the housing and transfer, it's the H&T index, so it's the housing and transportation affordability index, and they use census data. So to answer your question, I do believe it assumes some probably average of a car payment.
Okay.
That would go into that, yeah.
Because that was alarming otherwise.
Oh, sure, no,
Right.
I completely agree, but it's not uncommon. Just given Berthoud's proximity to larger areas of employment, right? So kind of functioning as a bedroom community, you're gonna see a higher increase, or a greater increase in the cost specifically, not for transportation. In communities, I think gosh, I think Mead might be even like 60%, like 58, 59%. So it is not uncommon that kind of shakes out in that way because you move farther out of denser areas for a different type of housing or for a lower cost of housing, and yet then with that comes an increase in the transportation cost. So
I'm generally supported with all of the comments that have been made, right? The stepped approach, the pilot program with funding, that sort of thing. And then I guess I would be interested if it's at all possible in any sort of future presentations, if somewhere you guys could find a way to sort of show citizen feedback on how much that transportation cost was before utilizing transit and then after, just to kind of get a more of a better picture of the not only the cost and benefit to the town itself or to a town itself, but also to the riders themselves. If that can be done, right? I don't
Yeah,
know.
and I don't know,
If those
think, like,
numbers are out
how-
there, right? Because that's kind of a difficult statistic, I understand, but
how that would be reported to the American Community Survey, but you could track it, I think, probably internally at the town to understand the the general cost, so.
Mayor Pro Tem?
First, I guess, would like to move to extend the meeting due date. The meeting
End date.
to be extended to conclude business for the evening.
All
Hopefully
right.
not end date, just end time.
Well, it can be
Yeah.
end
I
date.
don't wanna extend the date, I don't think.
I'll second that.
All right.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There we go. All right.
Okay.
Good call.
So I guess to everyone else's point, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is like right now. This is that exact kind of seed. Yeah, $1.2 million is a very big sticker to get scared of. I agree. Same with, even just adding $25,000 to a relatively inefficient way of public transportation. The money could be spent much better in other places. We could get scooters for everybody, but we're not doing this because, and those scooters are cool.
Yeah.
Golf carts.
We can afford golf carts for everyone.
Yeah, right?
It's not a crazy idea, to be honest.
Maybe join forces
Zap,
business.
I guess you're still driving, which is, okay, never mind.
Right. Well, I'm mostly interested to see, I think that right now the service itself has not been utilized, is not advertised, not many people know how to use it, what to do, how to get to it. Once those pieces are put in place, this will all fall more in, but we only get there by essentially anteing into it. Again, we're not saying what we're doing tonight, more just along the lines of, I'm very interested to see where this can go and the potential it'll have, because as everybody here knows, we do have some developments that are not too far off that will definitely have an impact, and building this and amenities around this might be a good time to, keep this in mind. So that's my only 2 cents.
Okay, sounds like you're supportive too. Who did you reach out to as far as the municipalities?
The municipalities or
Yeah.
the service providers?
The the ones that work with municipalities. I thought there was 3 you said?
Yeah, we talked to the Downtowner, we talked to Translock, and we talked to Ride with Via.
Okay, they're associated all with municipalities
They are the private contractors.
for the municipality.
Yes, and they all have a presence in Colorado.
So which ones do they work with?
Yeah, so Lone Tree, I know Ride with Via works with Lone Tree. Let's see, the Downtowner is more resort based, so I know that they are Aspen.
All right, I was gonna, all right.
Who else? We could get you the list.
No, that's
of-
okay,
yeah.
I think,
And
I wanted to try them,
They provide service in Denver also.
Yeah, I would say the Downtowner has a sub area of Denver, like the Montbello neighborhood that they also, I think it's the Montbello, like Green Valley
Someone
Ranch.
that just went live with a new app. I think I brought it up in our last meeting when you talked.
I think so, and I think it was the Green Valley Ranch.
And then Via's in Boulder as well. Is it the same
Well,
one?
Via in Boulder is different.
Different.
Yeah,
I
so.
was gonna bring that up.
It's confusing.
Yeah.
okay, so I just wanted to see if there's anyone close I could go check, but I'm really glad you brought up Aspen, because I've seen that one. I've actually called in and had to do some investigation, I don't think I was even on the board yet, but they have the little gem cars.
They have that,
Which would
and
sound
then they
perfect for
have
Because they're
I
like
think
so much cheaper to operate.
seasonally, I think seasonally, they also have a golf cart, like open air.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Gym cars are kind of like glorified golf carts that can go 25.
Okay, then we must be talking about the same
Yeah,
thing.
that's
Yes,
how it's
yeah,
functional.
okay,
I thought it'd be good for
So
birds.
they have a couple unique vehicle deployments,
Okay.
yes. I would say Lone Tree would be a great, so what's distinct about Lone Tree, and again, you know, this was something, Lone Tree looked very different 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But now with the hospital, with Charles Schwab, with the light rail connection, with a lot of the library, the rec center, like everything's kind of concentrated right there at like I-25 in Lincoln or just south of Lincoln. Their service area, I think it's just a really unique service because you can take it quickly to get on the light rail, or vice versa. If you get off at the light rail, you can take it really quickly. At least at the time, light rail didn't extend down to the hospital. You could take it to the hospital, and so yeah, that might be. I'm trying to think other ones that
Okay.
might be.
So that must have been when I was meeting with you earlier, you talked about, I thought that was Louisville, but it might have been, you were saying, I heard you wrong, I guess.
Lafayette, right? Free
Lafayette.
Yeah, Lafayette also has a
And
service.
that's the one that has the deviated fixed route with an app, you were saying, that you can kind of use an app to book.
Ride Free Lafayette, you can use an app to book, or you can book it online or call.
And there, that's via behind the scenes?
It's not via behind the scenes. It is. We have to look.
Well, it'd be good to
It's
get
not
it.
one of the three that we talked to.
talked to them.
But the actual like service provider is different, although I do think it's contracted through VIA.
Yeah, I think that'd be good to look at too. I'm supportive either way. I just think I'm glad we have you. This is really, really great.
Sure.
I'm a huge fan of transit, and it's not dead, it just started to smell funny, right? So I'm glad we're bringing it back. And I've heard of what Bats was, and Larry, the old driver. And it was incredible, and it was an incredible asset to seniors. It took them to the mountains, took them way out past Meade, and it understandably got super dialed down during the recession, and it just needs to be brought back up. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. And it's hard to judge saying we have low numbers on some of our routes, but we're not advertising, so people might not know, and it might not make a difference. But I think us getting out there with marketing and saying you have this opportunity to be an Berthoud citizen, give this a shot, you know. We might get more writers. So I'm for this. If it was me, I'd start with the SAAS because it's a cheaper option and kind of look at that. I do kind of wonder if we're getting ripped off though, so it might be good to get as many software.
Yeah, this.
I work with the worst software app on earth. Like my app's broken right now, but it's a template app, so it's another company that makes it, and then I just pay a maintenance fee. So to see 200,000 annually seems kind of crazy. It might be better to see, because there's other companies that's still a template, but it's handed over to the.
Again, the software doesn't cost $200,000.
Sorry, the difference 100,000, right?
Like 75.
Maybe 75.
Okay, so my point is, have someone else build it for you, turn it over, but
Yes.
then have a developer on contract, so if you need any, because once you have it built and you have a dashboard, it's already all there. I don't see a reason to have a person involved if it's all built, unless it breaks. That was my thought. So to sum up, it might be good to just reach out to a general developer or a development firm that might be doing this or have something similar. Because there's a lot of people that have rip-offs of Uber or Lyft. Great, that was it for me. That's from all of us. Amy, wait around.
Are you gonna be mad if I say
Britt, come on up. Open it up to the public.
3 things? I'm Amy Pillai, I live at 16 Mount Beaker, and I run the library. A couple of things that we've heard, parking is an issue downtown. So if there's a really easy way to pop downtown for dinner or go to story time at the library or whatever, where you don't have to fight for parking, might solve some parking issues. We heard when we were looking at our moving the building somewhere study that a lot of the middle school parents in particular don't want their kids crossing the railroad tracks on foot. So for anybody looking just to get from one side of the tracks to the other safely, especially those middle schoolers, that might be a good option for them. And then I would have, the only other thing would be a question is days like Berthoud Day or things like that where we have 5,000 people in a single park. Can that be scaled up for that day only so that, you know, there's less issues with trying to park everybody anywhere and everyone can still get in. So, pick up from that.
So has like thank you, has like tourism been built in, maybe a birthday day or a day that's
That's
not
something
just
we'd
birthday
have to talk
residents?
through with the service providers as we kind of get into
Yeah.
that.
Golf course, TPC,
I think it's a great,
Tourism.
that's a great question, and
It
it's
is.
definitely something we'd wanna ask, you know, what would it take to scale up for a big day like that? And, you know,
It's kind of
would
what's
they be
comparing
able
it
to
to the
move
sheriff's
well, and
resources?
hopefully there'd be a different fare or whatever, that some of that could be recuperated.
Oh, sure, I think it would just be access to vehicles and drivers.
Okay.
And you know, depending on who the contracted service provider would be, may influence how many vehicles they have
Okay.
available. I mean, typically these fleets are branded and, you know, like have wraps on the vehicles and you know, similar to the buses where, I mean, you know, you can see the logo, you can see the who it is and stuff, so I think it would depend on what availability and yeah, flexibility.
Okay, cool.
No.
I think that's a great point, and I also,
Yeah.
the parking has been an issue, and I think this really helps out. I mean, I'm assuming we'd do this at night, maybe we wouldn't, but you know, DUIs, people that are drinking and I don't want them back, you don't want them back in their car, right? So that could, and these are just little one-offs, but they all add up, you know?
One thing
Yeah.
about these services too, that I don't know that we mentioned, is that this is not it's not a taxi service in the sense that like with Uber, you can, when you book an Uber, it's just you, right? You have the option for shared rides, right, that are typically less expensive. But like, that's not necessarily how this service would operate. We could define those parameters too, right? Like if you book this service and it's free, anybody else that books it along that route can be picked up and taken where they need to go as well, all at the same time, right? So it becomes that shared ride service.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
thanks for that
and the
clarification.
algorithms can create, you know, like virtual bus stops, right? So if you have like 4 people that all request a ride at the same time, it can say, great, meet us here at the corner of whatever. And so it may not pick you up exactly where you wanna go, you might have to walk a block to the virtual bus stop and then that shows up there. I mean, there's just an enormous amount of flexibility with how the service is
Yeah, I
gonna
see,
operate.
thank you for clarifying, it does make the software a little more intricate when you're multiple people going in.
It's
But again,
it's no joke. I
A
mean, I
good
think
code
they're
doesn't break, right?
ultra
If
complicated.
something breaks, it's the coder's fault, so I don't think you need to pay that every year. Anyway.
I can give you some really good reasons why you do, but yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
Contract out. Pasadena does this. I just watched a YouTube thing on Parks Beautiful, but they have a minivan that's owned by the city, but
Mhm.
kind of being an Uber, but it groups people together. So they timed it slightly slower, but much quicker than a bus, it seems like, to get where you want to go.
Absolutely, yeah, I mean, it's moving away from that fixed route, like we only go down Mountain, and if you live a half mile from Mountain, well, enjoy your walk, you know, like it's moving away from that fixed route, but it's not going to the extent of saying you have your own vehicle, like a valet service, right, at all times. It's that in between, and what that in between looks like will vary. Versus if it's deployed in 2024 versus the service that may be continued to be provided in 2028. Because there's a learning, you know, that the algorithm will do and changes that will be made, and the fleet size may grow or change based on the number of people who are taking rides, and you know, seasonally they could change as well. So I will say that's probably one of the key reasons that microtransit emerged as kind of this leading recommendation, is because of that flexibility.
Okay, cool. I think kids should be walking, so tell the parents to contact us, cause we're gonna turn into a school system if it's time. No, Tim brought up to someone, one of our, I forgot who it was, but school board of, there's an increased traffic in front of my house because he lives by Turner. Do you think that's just, you know, more kids, or is this parents being more worried about their kids walking? And they said, actually, we think it's more parents just being concerned with their kids walking. And I think that's I don't know, part of exercise, and we need to work on our trail system and educate. Great, anything else, board? Sounds like we're generally supportive, don't wanna get into anything yet, but have staff kind of look at these options and federal funding and what we just put together.
We'll continue to explore the options and
See a balance sheet.
Yeah.
Business plan.
But by before budget, I mean, sometime before summer, around summer, so we.
yeah, I mean, you know, there
Keep
will
us
be
on
some
track.
federal funding timelines that if we wanna try to pursue, we'll have to kind of aggressively pursue those. I don't think there'll be a lot of expense from our standpoint other than staff time, you know, going through the RFP process, trying to define the scope and scale of the service and all that stuff. Some of the providers have offered to help us with grant applications, earmark requests. Obviously there's benefit for them in that they then get hired to do the service, right? you know, there's a lot of options out there for us to continue to study this.
An earmark option with trustee Hardy's thing might make sense for the Senate earmark or the House earmark, but going with Johnstown, because we're in a new district, so maybe a congressman would be more willing to look at something if it's covered multiple municipalities, like Tim was talking about, so that might be worth looking at an earmark as a group too.
Yeah, I believe
That
the
that might
last,
require a different kind of arrangement though. In that, like, when you're talking about, somebody has to be responsible for those federal funds, right? So then you need some kind of, maybe you could do that all via, you know, intergovernmental agreement, but that could get really complicated.
But yeah, it's like the one call, one
Outside kind
click,
of
we just
authority.
handed it over to the NPO until we figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm suggesting, there would have to be some kind of overarching entity
Right,
that'd be
right.
willing to
Sorry,
to
I
be
see what you're saying, that makes
You know
sense.
what I mean? Yeah.
I'll stop talking.
yeah, I think the congressionally directed spending was actually advocated through the senator's offices, not the House offices.
They'll have their own, Chris and I met with them last week, so
They're gonna get their
we have
own-
2 earmark opportunities. I know,
There you go.
we're going back in time.
Well, it is kind of going back in time,
It
yeah.
is.
I just know the consolidated like transit requests that have gone through CASTA the last 2 years. The first was very successful. I think 5 out of 6 of the agencies received funding. And then last year it was at least I think it was 1 or 2 that received funding through that request, so.
Awesome. Cool, anything else, board?
Now we have to move on something. We
Uh,
have to move on this.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, who, anyone like to move on this?
I'll move to approve the town of Berthoud transit assessment.
I'll second.
Okay, we have trustee Murphy has moved, trustee Sorcelli has seconded. Is there any final discussion on this? Clerk, can we have a roll call vote?
Mayor Pro Tem Grace.
Yes.
Trustee Grace.
Yes.
Trustee Ayers.
Yes.
Trustee Murphy.
Yes.
Trustee Sorcelli.
Yes.
Trustee Butler.
Yes.
Mayor Karspeck.
Yes, okay, thank you for being here.
Oh, sure, thank you.
Gotta bring those voodoo donuts next time.
I was thinking the same thing.
Just kind of put in your Denver request.
The gingerbread man with the pretzel through the heart.
Shit.
I had one with bacon, but it was old. I blame Chris. Okay, do you wanna do that year in review, Chris?
I'd like to suggest to the board, it's up to you, I'm happy to do it. I'm also happy to just email it to you, it's just a simple presentation. It's nothing earth shaking, it's all stuff you already know we did. But it's just something we've done the last few years, just as a good reminder and look back to remember a lot of things that we've been able to accomplish or that we've started.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah, otherwise, if we have a light agenda, maybe, it's really cool, I mean, I think it does, it puts things in perspective, so.
it's kind of fun. It's fun for me to go and just kind of go back through the list, and I know I didn't capture everything, right? I mean, it's like 7 or 8 slides, and there's thousands of things, but we didn't, you know, I didn't include, but anyway.
Okay.
It's up to you. I can click through it quickly and then I can just email it out to everybody also, which I intend to do regardless, but
Got a stopwatch,
it's up to you.
5 minutes or less, think you can do it.
I'll work on my
sides,
best
1 minute
micro
per slide.
machines.
Yeah.
Let's just go for it.
So
Is that all right with everyone, or do you really want to see
I
it?
would prefer to email, cause I would,
Oh.
I'm tired right now, so I think I would enjoy it better when I'm not.
All right, raise your
But
hand if you wanna see it right
I'm outnumbered,
now.
I understand.
I've been up since
Okay.
4:30 a.m.
Sounds like I was the only one.
Just as long as it's reverse
Hey,
chronological.
I'm a night owl, I'm just getting geared up.
Oh my
Alright.
goodness.
I'm kidding.
Someone had a
All right, start out with elected, yeah, look at it. Elected official reports, and we'll start off with trustee Hardy.
do I have anything? No, we do not. HPAC didn't meet because of Adam leaving, haven't met this month. Yeah.
Okay, trustee Ayers,
I have nothing.
Trustee Butler,
Nothing.
trustee Sorcelli,
I was just gonna make a couple of communication suggestions, like I would love to see our agenda items previewed on our Facebook page for the community to see what's coming up, so they could come participate. And maybe turn off commenting so they don't get into the debate on Facebook.
I thought they were in
But,
line, I thought we
you
already
know,
did that.
encourage them, like if you,
Oh, on Zoom we did that,
if
but
you
on
have,
Facebook they can comment?
if you have
I
comments to
think that
add,
really affects
here's what's
me.
coming up, we'd love your feedback.
Yeah, comments are never happy.
It's the purest form of
Well,
democracy.
it's because
My
you
government's
can
doing
hide behind a
fantastic.
computer and you get more nasty that way, but if they come in person and they can engage with us and get to know us and we can have that rapport and then it gets them in the room where they see the the kind of work in progress, I think that it helps us all grow. So I would love to see the agenda items published and encourage people, also maybe have some sort of demo, like here's how to participate in our public meetings. Here's what it looks like, here's our boardroom, here's how much time you get, you know, just kind of here's your board and here's how, you know,
That we
what's
do
expected.
post on Facebook, but we don't post the agenda items, so currently,
Yes,
I think that's a fair suggestion.
it's something I would
We do have a
like
link to
see.
our webpage that explains how the meetings run and how you participate and all that stuff.
I'm speaking from like the 10-second millennial crowd that's like, they're not gonna go to the website, they have they don't wanna get involved, but if it's presented a certain way, they may change how they engage. And they may want to come start, you know, participating and see that it's a great time to say something or participate. And then with the 2020 review, I'm excited to see that. If there's any way to snapshot that, I would be honored to be able to share that even like on my personal page
Yeah.
to say, hey, look what we've
Put it on social
accomplished or what we worked on as a team and look how amazing our staff is. Like just anything that kind of encapsulate it in like even a picture or something, like I said, the 10-second millennial generation, and I put myself in that category on occasion, but something that we can all share with pride and say, look how amazing our town of
multiple
North
slides.
Is that possible?
There's no 10-second version I can create. That-
I'm sure
that-
there's
that
not,
I'm
just-
sure of.
What about just multiple slides,
to-
little
just to-
pseudo slides, like, hey, we
Yeah, the
accomplished
sli-
this,
the
we
slides-
accomplished this.
The slides that I have that you'll see will lack context, cause obviously I was been planning to talk about them, but I think they'll still make sense to you, I hope.
Record yourself.
But yeah,
just some ideas.
100%.
That podcast you've been kicking
That's
around.
Podcast
Chris
person
Kirk
right there.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Kirk
Do it
and
with Amy.
Tila.
You can do your presentation as a podcast and then the whole community gets to see it besides us.
There we go. It's a great idea, Justice Sarcelli.
I like that.
Is
That's
that,
it.
okay, Trustee Murphy?
I'll try and be quick. Got a few things to bring up. I'm gonna be gone for the second meeting in February, just a heads up. I've had some discussions with some citizens on Second Street and the quality of the street. I don't know if you guys have driven down there. It's filled with potholes and it's terrible.
North or south?
South of Welch.
Okay.
To be specific, we have some work slated in 2024. I've talked with Administrator Kirk about some of that and the town's responsibility. And going above and beyond what we kind of have slated from our engineering firm, I think we should pursue when we go to do that repair on that street, which I think is a total rebuild. So just something to keep in mind this fall. And then just kind of following up on two things I brought up earlier this month. Just some of the discussions last year dealing with public lands. I thought it'd be really great to get together with the Larimer County Commissioners if we have an opportunity. Doesn't have to necessarily be formal or anything. I mean, I like the TSD meetings where we get together and get to kind of chat about things, so.
And sandwiches.
Yeah, and sandwiches.
Sandwiches.
So I don't know if that's something we could set up sometime this year.
I think it's a great idea. I forgot to discuss anything with that, but the commissioners used to do that with this like quarterly, it was great, and we all get together. That kind of went out after COVID, but I think they would appreciate it.
The county is gonna host a regional elected officials meeting. Again, I don't know if they're doing them quarterly anymore, but I think they're planning to do them twice a year.
But you were talking maybe something a little more.
Well, you were
intimate,
thinking
just
just Bertha, right?
Just kinda us versus them, you know, if they have the time for that, you know, it could even be us attending, you know, one of their meetings prior, like, you know, wondering if you guys were interested in taking it up. It revolved around setting a goal for ourselves to take up 2030 building codes that
Oh, yeah.
focused on net zero.
So you're asking if we want to see on an agenda?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I would totally support that.
I'm totally open to giving a presentation. I don't wanna take up staff's time. This is just, you know, my niche as like an architect, where I feel like I can bring my professional skills to bear without taking up too much time. So that was my thought, but
Oh, seems like there's four, so. The old rule used to be just 3 people and I'll get on an agenda. It's a good suggestion. Is that all right with everybody though?
I support it.
Cool.
is there a time we could set for that? That would work for you, Administrator Kirk?
I think it's up to you guys, it depends on what kind of information you want from us.
You guys could work together and then, trustee Murphy, and see what they need behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And then we could, the date, yeah.
So I don't have a community development director or a planner right now, as you know.
Yeah.
So it would be helpful to have somebody on board first.
And part of the reason I bring this up is because I think this is gonna be a critical part going forward for our building department and along with community development. So it's on your radar when we go to hire and stuff for this position. I think it's important they're thinking about this and how we're going to get there, because regardless of what we do as a town, I feel like this is something we need to be prepared for, because the state and the national level are all moving that direction, as well as most of the municipalities around here. And I think it's very achievable, so
Awesome, sounds like you got it.
that's all I've got.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem?
Youth advisory should be meeting tomorrow. I'm assuming that the agenda was received in time. They were supposed to meet last week, but new members, so getting some kinks out, all that good stuff. Did have a question, specifically, I believe, on Mountain and Berthoud Parkway or County Road 17. The northbound on County Road 17. So if you're going north over Mountain to go like to the rec center. I know the timings, they changed that, which was great, but it seems like during the day they've got some missed timings where every other direction will go twice. The south side gets to wait for 4 light cycles and really appreciate the scenery.
It happens at nighttime too, and I'm not really sure why.
Okay.
It doesn't happen all the time, and we don't manage the signal timing, obviously, because it's a CDOT owned signal.
Okay.
We have talked to them about that signal timing in particular. We've actually, I've noticed similar issues at 287 and Mountain Avenue also, where several light cycles will occur before the left turn arrow is triggered.
Yep.
And so I don't know how to fix it other than tell them I think it's a problem.
Well,
But we will push on CDOT.
Well, to add on to that dog pile, I don't think that they've installed that left turn lane if you're heading south onto Berthoud Parkway from 287. So you're turning left. There should be, if I understand it correctly, on that post, a left turn lane indicator saying it's a green turn left. I know they've added one where it's like a flashing yellow of like, you wanna turn left in front of 60-mile-an-hour traffic, take the wheel, but.
That's a different problem, but we've also reached out to them about that as well.
Okay.
That those new double left turn arrows, in my opinion, not being a traffic engineer, but I think Sergeant Anderson agrees with me, I know, because we've talked about it at the staff level, and so does our public works team. We've seen a significant increase in accidents at that intersection since CDOT changed and added those flashing yellow left turns, double left turns. So that signal's a mess too.
Yeah.
In my opinion. And we've also made a request for them to do a full speed analysis of 287 through Berthoud and all of Mountain Avenue from County Line Road to 287. When you sign the MOU with them to do the speed analysis, they make you sign a document that says this might increase speeds, so be careful what you wish for. But we still think it's appropriate that they do that.
Last one for the CDOT dog pile, railroad crossing. I know it's CDOT and railroad, so I made that the last one. Can we just like?
Are you talking about Spartan, or are you talking about?
Yeah, mountain,
shims.
yeah, if we all put on ski masks and asphalt and just put, shovels in, would that possibly fix it faster?
No.
Okay.
I'll ask Keith Noel, our Public Works Operations Manager, again, just to kind of check in and ping them. The last time, I think I mentioned this to you before, the last time we reached out, they basically said, thanks, we don't want your help.
Yeah, can we give you money? We don't want your help.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Only other 2 things that I could think of is if you guys wanted to do the casino night for the town, the sign up is due by tomorrow which is actually just up the street off the mountain. The other one is, I believe, the administrator review survey has been sent out. I don't know who has not filled it out yet, but friendly neighborhood reminder of please fill it out.
That's by Friday.
That's Friday, this Friday. So friendly reminder to have that filled out for everyone to properly review. And the end.
Awesome, thank you for those reminders. Mine are brief too. Administrator Kirk and I were, our new congressman wanted to meet with us as kind of just a feel of birthday. She met with all the city managers and sounds like mayors in her area. I will say she secretly commented that she thinks this is the most beautiful part of her district. So, hold that to her. I think it should be her headquarters.
She says that to all the parts of the district.
She tells all the cities that.
Well, I still think it needs to be her headquarters because it's not Lammer or Adams, so she's in a neutral area. But no, it was really great, and that's how we learned about the earmarking, and I just kind of, I didn't want to overwhelm her, and so I just brought up our post office, because that's like a federal issue, and she said, maybe she tells this to everyone too, but she said, it's funny driving in here, we were commenting on your post office and how tiny it is. So it was snowing, but I actually planned on kind of walking with them over there so they could see the inside, and it's not just poorly ran, it's just the sizing issue makes stuff is just stuffed everywhere and things are getting lost. So they said keep that in mind for the earmarking for when this comes around to remind them of it, and they liked really just having one thing to focus on. Other than that, she was really nice, and I can forward off her contact information in her staff, but you know, they're really just still trying to put this all together, her team, so. Let's see here. Dang it, I had one other thing, but
It was the meet with your mayor and town board, like coffee.
oh, no,
coffee.
yeah, that was different. Aaron wants to just have a night with a meeting with the mayor, and I told him that I'd like to invite another trustee each time. I think I'm just gonna do it anyways, and then if you, right? I mean, if you guys say, no, you can't have a mayor's meeting, I'm gonna do it anyways, right? But
Okay.
I mean, so the conversation, but yeah, if you guys wanna come, I'd love to invite you.
As an independent citizen in this free state, free country of America, you're allowed to do a lot of
I know,
things, you're
Charlie,
right.
thank you. But Aaron was just trying to say his place is open, and yeah, I think some outreach would be really great. People might wanna show up, and Chris and I did this a couple times during rec center stuff, and that got, I don't know, got a little heated at times, so I think we kind of stopped and then never started it back up, so. Actually, one of them was just you and me that showed up and talked for an hour, so.
That's true.
It was also an attendance issue.
That was good.
Yeah, it was good. But yeah, I'm gonna start those up again and yeah, just get the word out. Also reached out to the Prairie Star Metro District President, cause I wanted to meet with them on Thursday, cause they meet at City Star, but unfortunately now they're meeting Tuesday nights, so we won't probably be able to meet with him unless we don't have a meeting that night. But basically, he's just trying to get them more involved and had some really good ideas and good things to say about Metro District that I thought it would be good to sit down with them more. So that is it. I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting if there's
Well,
nothing
you
else.
got staff or
Just kidding.
staff?
Administrator Kirk?
The only thing I wanted to bring up, we didn't get a chance to talk about it in the study session. I'm assuming we're not gonna get a chance to talk about it in much detail tonight, but was the idea of scheduling study sessions before our regular meetings. I know that presents some scheduling challenges for you guys, so maybe we'll just send out an email with kind of a basic breakdown of how we think that might work and what we might focus on and how those might go. And just kind of take an informal poll about schedule availability in order to do that. I will say from a staff standpoint, it's much easier for us to plan for a study session and a regular meeting in the same week. When we had meetings back to back to back like we did the last 3 weeks, then half your week is spent preparing for the meeting and then the other half is spent preparing for the next one. And so it becomes this kind of, it becomes a very demanding cadence on top of trying to do other things. So to the extent that we can, I mean, we've done plenty of study sessions where we'd have 3 or 4 meetings in 1 month, and that's, you know, we can do that. But as the norm, that's a challenge, so doing them before regular board meetings would certainly be beneficial from a staff standpoint. We just need to make sure that we can do that from a scheduling standpoint. So I'll send out an email with just some kind of broad thoughts about how that might work. Then you guys can let us know if that makes sense, and then we can talk about it at the next meeting if that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. I did forget what I was, yeah, thank you. gonna bring up, and that was the school board thing that got, Jeff Hyman forwarded on. And yeah, I just learned about it an hour ahead of time that school board was kind of wanting to abandon an agreement with a private property owner, Jane Valier. And I wasn't really there for that, but to me, that was a bigger question of if you abandon that, then it looks like you're just wanting to get on town water and not maintain not want to keep working on their non-potable system. And so, yes, it was great to see them have a really good conversation and kind of question one another and question why this is getting pushed hard. And I was really impressed with the new school board members to really say we need to just hold off and get more information. So I was just thinking if basically just to get Dr. Schaefer, Todd, and Administrator Kirk and Jane in a room, I don't know. See.
I've already emailed back and forth with Todd Coney about it a little bit.
Great.
So.
All right, cool. Well, I just wanted to praise people of that, but that's it. Anything else?
The community development director and planner, what status on that?
Forgetting everybody.
I've interviewed 4 candidates for the community development director position, all 4 of who were well qualified, so that's exciting to get good qualified applicants, because that's been a real challenge the last few years. We've taken a much more aggressive and kind of unique, maybe different approach to advertising, and it's worked, so that's good. I hope to have follow-up interviews with one of those candidates next week, and if they turn out to be the right person, hopefully we'll have somebody here in just the next few weeks. And then I'll allow that person to, and then I think I already understand timing with who I think is my top candidate. I want my leadership team to get to meet with them and spend some time taking them on a tour and some other things, but
That's great. That's encouraging that you
Yeah.
kind of have one on the line.
and
Would that be
the
bringing
person's
Adam too?
local, with a really good background and set of experience, so we'll see. I mean, you never know. I know that this particular person's being actively recruited by a couple of other communities, and so
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You said he's local?
it's a she actually,
Okay.
but yeah, she's from the region.
Would we also be looking at a replacement for Adam, so they had some help?
We will be, yeah, absolutely, but I want this person, I want that person to hire their own staff. I don't wanna do it for them.
Okay, Attorney Smith,
I have nothing, Your Honor.
okay. I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Have a great night, everyone.